Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Stephany Flores Ramirez. Stephany Flores Ramirez was born on July 22, 1988, to Ricardo Flores and Maria Elena Ramirez. She was a kind and easygoing child. Her family was quite wealthy. Her father was involved in the auto racing industry and was building a successful political career. Stephany grew up in a prestigious family. Her four brothers were all from the upper class and had access to the best education. Stephany excelled in school, earning the admiration and respect of her teachers and classmates. In 2008, at the age of 20, Stephany enrolled at the University of San Martin de Porres to study business administration. By 2010, as a third-year student, she had many great ideas and hopes for her future. Despite her innocent appearance and excellent academic performance, Stephany knew how to enjoy life. With a lot of money at her disposal, she frequented the best nightclubs and casinos in the country. On the night of May 30, 2010, at a casino called Atlantic City, Stephany met a mysterious man named Joran van der Sloot at around 3 a.m. She sat down at the poker table next to him, and they were instantly attracted to each other, although they came from different countries. They both spoke fluent English and quickly found common ground. Stephany was drawn to Joran's confidence and easygoing demeanor, while he was captivated by her beauty and smile. During their conversation, Stephany asked Joran how he came to Lima. He said he was on vacation to escape some personal troubles. At that time, Stephany had no idea that his troubles were related to the murder of a woman. Joran deceived her by claiming that he was the son of a wealthy lawyer and judge. This made Stephany feel safe, as she believed that someone from a wealthy family like hers could not be dangerous. They talked at the poker table late into the night. Stephany was an experienced gambler, knowing how to assess odds and calculate how to win money. Just a few days earlier, she had won $10 in a game after hours of chatting. They had consumed a considerable amount of alcohol. What started as a casual conversation gradually turned into flirting. Eventually, Joran invited Stephany to spend the night with him, and to her surprise, she agreed. They went to a hotel in the Miraflores area, where Joran rented a room. There are differing accounts of whether the pair became intimate. Some say they had an intimate encounter, while others claim that Stephany simply went to his room to continue playing online poker. The details of that night are somewhat unclear, however. It is confirmed that at some point, Stephany accessed Joran's laptop. Stephany later learned of Joran's connection to Natalie Holloway's death. She had been lured into a dangerous situation, and now she was trapped with a criminal. Stephany tried to escape, but was unable to. When Joran realized she had discovered his secret, he became furious. A struggle ensued. He hit Stephany in the nose with a crowbar, causing her to bleed mercilessly. Joran overpowered her and began strangling her. He then continued to attack her until she stopped breathing. When morning came, Stephany still hadn't returned home. Her father, Ricardo, grew increasingly worried as time passed. He knew his daughter always came home, which made him fear that something was wrong. He contacted his son, Enrique, for help in finding Stephany. They called Stephany's co-workers, but when they found nothing, they contacted the police to report her missing. Ricardo discovered that his daughter had been gambling the night before. Peruvian police then went to Atlantic City to investigate further. There, they reviewed surveillance camera footage of Stephany playing poker and drinking. During the night, she met a tall young man. The police quickly identified him and obtained his national identification number. From that point on, Joran van der Sloot became the prime suspect in Stephany's disappearance. It was discovered that the two had left the casino together around 5 a.m. that morning, although their exact destination was initially unclear. It was noted that they were returning to the hotel where Joran was staying. The footage showed the pair entering his hotel room. Hours later, Joran left the room alone, but returned with 2 cups of coffee and a loaf of bread. 3 hours after they entered, Joran left the room again, still alone. As he left, He informed a hotel employee that Stephany was still in the room, but asked that she not be disturbed as she was only sleeping. On June 2, 3 days after Stephany's death, and after Joran had checked out, a hotel employee discovered her body in room 309. Police found a tennis racket in the room, believed to be the weapon used in the attack. After verifying the name associated with the room, police confirmed that it was Joran van der Sloot. After leaving the hotel, he left the TV on full volume, possibly creating the illusion that someone was still inside. Police were unable to determine where he went after the crime. In an effort to quickly identify Joran, the police released his information and photo to all media outlets. In further investigation, police learned that Joran van der Sloot was born on August 6, 1987, into a wealthy family. He has 2 older brothers, his mother is an art teacher, and his father has a well-paying job that provides for the family. They live a comfortable life. Enjoying traveling, Joran attends a local international school, where he is a diligent student. He is tall, attractive, and athletic, participating in football and tennis while regularly practicing with his father. Despite doing well in school, Joran was a spoiled brat and a habitual liar. In contrast to his calm older brothers, he displayed arrogant and flamboyant behavior, often sneaking out at night to go to casinos. In 2005, he met an American girl named Natalie Holloway. As their relationship developed, Joran expressed a desire to be intimate with her. When Natalie refused, he became violent and kicked her in the head when she was unconscious. He abused her to cover up his crime. He murdered her. The case of Natalie's disappearance and Joran's involvement attracted international media attention. Maintaining public interest for a decade, Joran was the prime suspect from the beginning. But due to numerous legal issues, he could not be convicted despite repeated interrogations and detentions. How did Joran get to Lima? And where did he get the money for the trip? In fact, he blackmailed Natalie's family, promising to reveal the location of their daughter's body in exchange for cash. After receiving a portion of the money, Joran fled to Lima to pursue his gambling ventures there. At a casino in Atlantic City, he met his second victim, Stephany, whom he killed on the 5th anniversary of Natalie's death. Joran became the prime suspect in the case, leading to his placement on Interpol's wanted list. Police in neighboring countries were informed of the situation. His whereabouts were soon traced. When he entered Chile via the Chacaluta border, police confirmed that he was in Chile. After tracing him, he was later found after taking a taxi in Vina del Mar, a coastal city. Chilean police arrested him as he was walking toward Santiago. Joran was immediately taken into custody, and the bloodied clothing of the victim, Stephany, was found in his possession. Initially, Joran denied any involvement in her death, claiming that armed robbers had attacked them in their hotel room. He alleged that when Stephany refused to cooperate, they killed her. This explanation was seen as an attempt to evade responsibility. On July 5, after Joran was deported to Peru, an official investigation began. He was questioned, and after several days of police interrogation, he realized he had no way out and confessed to the crime. In his written statement, he detailed the events that took place that night. He claimed that he had left the hotel to buy coffee and bread, but when he returned, he discovered that Stephany was using his computer and that she knew he was involved in Natalie's death. According to Joran, when he tried to explain with Stephany, she hit him and ran toward the door. He then stopped her. He insisted that he never intended to kill her. However, when she invaded his privacy without permission, he became angry, lost control, and ultimately took Stephany's life. Joran claimed that he drank coffee laced with an illegal pill, then packed his things and left the hotel. Subsequent toxicology tests showed no trace of any pills in his system, suggesting that he may have used this strategy to reduce his sentence in Peru. Crimes committed under the influence of illegal substances often result in lighter sentences, and it appears that Joran's attorneys were aware of this and sought to exploit it, Joran was subsequently arrested on charges of robbery and first-degree murder. Given the severity of Joran's actions and the wealth of his family, the judge denied his request for bail on the morning of the trial. An angry crowd gathered outside the courthouse, expressing their outrage by throwing fruit and eggs at Joran as he was escorted inside. Joran had previously been held in a maximum security prison in South America, known for its harsh conditions, where he was constantly monitored. He was offered a chance to be transferred to a prison in Aruba if he revealed the location of Natalie's body. But he refused the offer. Joran's attorneys have argued that Joran lost control during the attack on Stephany because she took his laptop without permission. If the judge had accepted this argument, Joran could have faced a lighter sentence of only 3 to 5 years in prison, and with good behavior, he might have been released after 20 months. However, these efforts have failed. On January 11, 2012, Joran van der Sloot pleaded guilty to the murder and robbery of Stephany Flores Ramirez. He was sentenced to 28 years in prison and ordered to pay $75 to Stephany's family. This marked the end of Stephany's case. However, Joran's criminal story is not over yet. He was recently extradited to the United States to face charges of extorting Natalie's parents. Concerned that his sentence could be longer than life, he decided to plead guilty. Natalie Holloway's case took a turn when Joran van der Sloot pleaded guilty to extortion and wire fraud. The plea added 20 years to his sentence, which he would have to serve after his release from a Peruvian prison. Although Joran confessed to killing Natalie, he was not punished for that crime. Instead, he was sentenced to a total of 28 years in a Peruvian prison. After serving his sentence, he was transferred to a U.S. prison to serve an additional 20 years for extorting Natalie's family. During this time, little was known about what happened. Notably, Joran's father, who had supported him, died of a heart attack. Although Joran faced a total of 48 years in prison, many felt that this punishment was insufficient given his cruelty. Stephany and Natalie lived short but vibrant lives, filled with love and the promise of a bright future. Their families and friends are devastated by the loss of their beautiful daughters, sisters, and girlfriends. It is heartbreaking to know that their lives were taken by a criminal with no compassion. If Joran had been incarcerated sooner, with enough evidence against him, Stephany might still be alive today.
A 911 call reported a woman lying at the bottom of a staircase outside an apartment complex. Initially, it appeared to be a terrible accident. Perhaps she had tripped and fallen. Her keys and wallet were around her. Nothing seemed to be stolen, including her money. However, something felt off about the situation. When first responders arrived, they quickly determined that this was more than a simple fall. As detectives investigated further, they discovered evidence that transformed this case from an accident into a murder investigation. What truly happened to Danita Smith, and who wanted her dead? Danita Smith was born on November 20, 1981, in New Bern, North Carolina. She was cherished by her parents, Calvin Lee Smith and Sharon Elaine Cook, along with her 3 siblings. Danita was naturally vibrant and full of life, making her presence impossible to overlook. Friends and family often remarked that she had the unique ability to brighten any room, thanks to her warmth, kindness, and infectious smile. Her happiness shone through in every photo, reflecting her joyful spirit. In school, Danita was a dedicated and hardworking student, earning the praise of her teachers. Her commitment led her to graduate high school with honors. She then attended North Carolina Central University, starting her studies in English. During her college years, Danita discovered a passion for photojournalism. She became captivated by the power of visual storytelling and how a single photograph could evoke strong emotions. With her usual determination, she pursued this new interest and quickly gained a reputation for her outstanding photography skills. In her personal life, Danita was happy with her fiancé, Jameer Stroud, a young police officer from Greensboro, North Carolina. They met in college and had a strong relationship for 6 years before getting engaged. For Danita, their engagement signified an exciting new chapter filled with hopes for marriage, career achievements, and building a future together. However, they faced a challenge: distance. After graduating in 2004, Jamir moved to Greensboro for his job, while Danita stayed in Durham. Although they were only about an hour apart, this physical separation limited their ability to see each other every day, making their relationship depend largely on weekend visits. Unfortunately, the distance may have also created an emotional gap. Unbeknownst to Danita, Jamir had started an affair with a colleague, Shannon Crawley, a 911 dispatcher and single mother of 2. On the morning of January 4, 2007, just after 10 a.m., a distressed call came into 911 from a man in Durham, North Carolina. He reported a shocking scene outside an apartment complex, a woman lying motionless at the bottom of the stairs, surrounded by blood. When first responders arrived, it was already too late. The woman was unresponsive. Moments later, authorities confirmed that the victim was Danita Smith. Detective Sean Pate from the Durham Police Department led the investigation and arrived at the scene to evaluate the situation. Initially, it looked like Danita had suffered a tragic fall. Her personal items, keys, wallet, were scattered around her, suggesting she might have lost her balance. There were no surveillance cameras to provide clarity, but as authorities examined Danita's body more closely, it became evident that she hadn't simply fallen, she had been murdered. A gunshot wound to the head was discovered, and her body's position had initially hidden the wound, leading others to mistakenly believe she had just fallen down the stairs. As officers reviewed her belongings, they found something odd: her wallet still had a large amount of cash in it. If a robbery had occurred, it was unlikely the thief would have left the money behind. So what was the motive for the murder? After this shocking revelation, law enforcement quickly began searching the area for witnesses. The apartment complex, which mainly housed students, was usually busy, but fewer residents were there due to the holiday season. Nevertheless, officers found a few people who had noticed something unusual. The most significant statement came from the maintenance director of the complex. He reported seeing a woman leave the scene around the time of the incident. She was described as a tall black woman, driving a burgundy Ford Explorer. This important detail raised immediate concerns. Could this woman be linked to Danita's murder? The maintenance director had not only seen the woman but had also spoken to her. After hearing a gunshot, he noticed that she looked visibly shaken. When he asked if she had heard the shot, she confirmed that she had and appeared very upset. He proposed that they meet at another location to report the incident to the police together, but instead, she left the scene. As news of Danita's death spread, her loved ones hurried to the scene, including her fiancé, Jamir. Upon arrival, he sought out Detective Sean Pate, eager to speak with him. As is common in homicide investigations, authorities carefully examined the victim's significant other. When asked about his whereabouts that morning, Jamir said he had been home sleeping after working late the previous night, but he could not provide anyone to confirm his alibi. Although his defense wasn't very strong, the police were still gathering information, so they took note of his statement and allowed him to leave. After spending some time with Danita's family, Jamir returned home. The following day, investigators contacted him again with more questions. One important question was whether Jamir knew anyone who drove a burgundy Ford Explorer. His answer altered the course of the investigation. Without any hesitation, he named Shannon Crawley. This new information shifted the focus away from Jamir himself, who had initially been a suspect. When asked further, Jamir revealed that he had an affair with Shannon, which he described as a mistake. He mentioned that their romantic relationship ended nearly a year prior, largely because Shannon became pregnant in 2005. They decided to have an abortion, which marked the end of their romance. Although he claimed their relationship was over, Shannon continued to be a part of his life. Although they were no longer lovers, they still communicated regularly. Jamir described their connection as a strong friendship, but nothing beyond that. It became clear that Shannon might not have viewed their breakup in the same way. Even after they ended their relationship, Shannon remained involved in Jamir's life. She began attending his church, which he initially thought was just a coincidence. Then she bought a home nearby, which he also dismissed, thinking she simply liked the area. However, as investigators examined the timeline, it became evident that Shannon's feelings for Jameer had not diminished. Jameer stated that Danita and Shannon had never met, but during his conversations with investigators, he revealed an unsettling thought. He now believed Shannon had been stalking him for a while, although he hadn't recognized it before. Specific events started to make sense. He reiterated that he was the one who ended their relationship. Additionally, he remembered the last time he saw Shannon was on Christmas Eve of 2006, just weeks before Danita's murder. That night, he proudly entered the church with his fiancée Danita. Shannon was there and reacted with shock. She had no idea Jameer was engaged, or even that he was in a relationship. Until that moment, she might have thought they were about to reconnect, but she was confronted with the reality that Jameer was soon to marry someone else. Investigators had sufficient reasons to question Shannon directly. They went to her workplace to inquire about her activities on the morning of the murder. Shannon said she had been at home taking care of her sick child. She openly acknowledged her past relationship with Jameer and did not try to hide it. However, her account differed significantly from Jameer's statements to the police. Shannon claimed their relationship ended because she did not want children, while Jay said it ended after she became pregnant and had an abortion. When asked if she knew Danita, Shannon said she had never met her, believing Danita was Jameer's ex-girlfriend. This answer raised suspicions, suggesting that Jameer had kept his two relationships completely separate, making Shannon believe she was the only woman in his life. A key question arose: did Shannon own a firearm? She replied no, but investigators soon found out she was not telling the truth. A coworker of hers, Ronald Simpson, came forward with information that Shannon had bought a revolver from him in October 2006. This was significant because the gun matched the caliber used in Danita's murder. Not only did Shannon lie about owning a firearm, but she had also purchased it just months before Danita was killed. Detectives reviewed the phone records of both Shannon and Jameer. Jameer's records showed that his phone was at home during the time of the murder, supporting his alibi. While this did not completely exonerate him, since someone else could have used his phone, it was a positive indication for him. In contrast, Shannon's phone records revealed a different situation. Even though she claimed to have been at home all morning, cell tower data placed her in Durham, about 60 miles from her stated location, around the time of the murder, which brought her closer to the crime scene. When confronted about this evidence, Shannon maintained that she hadn't been in Durham that day, but the facts were not in her favor. The police then seized Shannon's burgundy Ford Explorer for forensic testing, specifically looking for gunshot residue. The analysis showed clear evidence of gunshot residue on the steering wheel, indicating that Shannon likely fired a weapon before or after driving the vehicle. This strongly suggested her involvement in the shooting incident. One last crucial detail was the testimony of the maintenance worker who talked to the woman running away from the scene. While there was no official record of a police lineup, the worker consistently described the suspect as a tall black woman driving a burgundy Ford Explorer. This description matched Shannon Crawley perfectly. On January 9, 2007, Shannon was arrested and charged with the murder of Danita Smith. Despite the serious charges, she was released soon after on a $100,000 bond, likely because she had no prior criminal record. Additionally, her role as a 911 dispatcher and the sole caretaker of her two young children likely influenced the court's decision to grant her bail. However, instead of waiting for her trial, Shannon and her attorney took an unexpected step in May 2007. They voluntarily went to the Durham Police Department to offer a new account of events, significantly changing the story. Shannon claimed that her ex-boyfriend, Jameer, had been stalking her after their breakup. She stated that he frequently called her, showed up at her workplace without warning, made her feel unsafe. According to Shannon, a worried coworker even offered her a gun for protection, knowing that Jameer, being a police officer, owned a firearm. She acknowledged that she took the gun but later regretted it and disposed of it shortly after. Shannon made a shocking revelation to the police. She stated that on the morning Danita was murdered, Jameer forced her at gunpoint into her own car. She alleged that he made her drive to an unfamiliar apartment complex, which was Danita's home. After taking her phone and keys, he exited the vehicle. She described sitting in the car for a long time, confused about what was happening, until she suddenly heard shouting. Although she couldn't understand the words, she recognized Jameer's voice arguing with a woman. Then, she heard a gunshot. According to Shannon, Jameer ran back to the car in a panic and demanded that she drive away. He got into the back seat, crouching on the floor and urging her to leave quickly. At that moment, she claimed to have seen a maintenance worker. She briefly stopped, hoping he would see that she was in trouble, but ultimately drove off because Jameer was pressing his gun against her back. However, there were immediate issues with her account. She needed to explain the gunshot residue found on the steering wheel of her car. She told the police that during their escape, Jameer had grabbed the wheel while moving from the front seat to the back, leaving the residue behind. Shannon was out on bond for nearly 2 years before her trial finally started on February 8, 2010. During the trial, the prosecution argued that Shannon had developed an obsession with Jameer and saw Danita as an obstacle to her future with him. They claimed that jealousy and a desperate need to eliminate the competition motivated her actions. In contrast, the defense argued that Shannon was being framed and that Jameer was the real culprit. However, Shannon did not provide any specific reasons for believing that Jameer would have committed the crime. Instead, she described him as violent and controlling, presenting him as a dangerous, unpredictable man. Despite the defense's efforts, the jury would hear about Shannon's past false allegations against Jameer, including the abuse accusation that had been thoroughly disproven. Her legal team fought aggressively to keep this information out of the trial, but they lost. The court allowed the jury to consider the fact that she had made false claims in the past, which was a devastating blow to her credibility. Jameer took the stand as the prosecution's star witness. He spoke about his relationship with Shannon, their breakup, and the troubling behavior she displayed afterward. He was articulate and presented himself as composed and credible. However, when it was the defense's turn to cross-examine, they highlighted one critical flaw: Jameer had spent years deceiving both Shannon and Danita. Then, the prosecution introduced a crucial piece of forensic evidence: the bullet fragment recovered from Danita's body. While the murder weapon itself had never been found, forensic experts confirmed that the bullet matched the type of gun Shannon had purchased just months before the crime. Shannon also took the stand. She repeated the same story she had told the police, insisting that Danita had forced her to accompany him to Danita's apartment, that she had no idea what was happening, and that she was merely an unwilling participant. She delivered her testimony with confidence, never wavering under questioning for a moment. It seemed like she was holding her own. Then the prosecution revealed what would be her undoing: tape recordings. Shannon had secretly recorded conversations with Jameer after Danita's murder, supposedly in an effort to get him to confess. These tapes had been provided to her defense team, but they had chosen not to use them. That alone was suspicious. The prosecution, however, had no reservations about playing the recordings in court. In the recordings, Shannon could be heard questioning Jameer about what had happened. At one point, he asked who she had been talking to. She denied speaking to anyone, but he continued to press her. Then he issued what seemed to be a chilling threat, warning that if she kept talking, he would find her. The voice on the recording sounded unusually high-pitched, nothing like Jameer's natural speaking voice. The prosecution seized the opportunity, pointing out the discrepancy. Even Danita's friends and family, who knew Jameer well, testified that the voice on the tape didn't sound like him at all. The implication was clear: Shannon had staged the recordings. The prosecution suggested that she had hired someone to impersonate Jameer in an attempt to fabricate evidence and shift the blame onto him. By this point, Shannon's credibility had been completely dismantled. In the end, the jury found Shannon Crawley guilty of Danita Smith's murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As for Jameer, he eventually left law enforcement and pursued a career in financial advising. He moved on with his life, getting married and starting a family. Yet, in the end, no outcome could undo the tragic loss of Danita Smith. By all accounts, she was a remarkable woman with a bright future. She had so much left to accomplish, so many dreams that would never come to fruition. But her memory remains alive, not only through the justice that was served but in the hearts of her family and friends who continue to honor her life. The tragic murder of Danita Smith exposed a tangled web of jealousy, deception, and betrayal, culminating in Shannon Crawley's life sentence for a crime driven by unrequited obsession. While justice was served, it could not restore the vibrant life of a talented photojournalist whose dreams were cut short. Danita's legacy endures through the love of her family and friends, who cherish her warmth and spirit, and in the enduring lesson that truth, however obscured, will ultimately prevail. In May 2023, police in Spain received a troubling call from a peaceful neighborhood in Torremolinos. Inside one of the apartments, they found the body of a young woman who had been stabbed multiple times. The suspect managed to escape but was caught a few hours later at a nearby cafe. However, this tragedy was just the starting point for a string of discoveries that connected to a case that had remained unsolved for 9 years. Behind the wall of a different apartment, investigators uncovered evidence that stunned even the most seasoned forensic professionals. In 2011, Sabora Gagani lived with her boyfriend Marco Gayo Romeo in a small house in Torremolinos, Spain, close to the beaches. On the surface, their life appeared stable. Sabora worked as a waitress, and Marco was a chef. She frequently called her mother, Elisabetta, to reassure her that everything was fine. However, beneath this facade of stability were serious issues that became more apparent over time. When Elisabetta visited, she could immediately sense the tension in their home. Arguments between Sabora and Marco happened even in front of her. Elisabetta noticed that Sabora often tried to excuse Marco's jealousy and anger, attributing them to temporary difficulties. Yet, Elisabetta believed that their problems were much deeper than everyday challenges. Just 2 years ago, Sabora was a very different person. Sabora was born on September 14, 1991, in Albania. She was known for her vibrant and cheerful nature from an early age. After her parents divorced, her mother, Elisabetta, relocated with her children to Rome, Italy, where they began anew. Sabora quickly became well-liked by her peers, earning the nickname Tibby because of her lively and warm personality. Despite facing financial difficulties, she was determined to help her family. She began working as a waitress at a young age but never lost sight of her dreams. Her natural beauty, slim figure, and success in a local beauty contest opened doors to the modeling industry. However, her greatest aspiration was to become a teacher, as she truly loved working with children. Things started to change when Sabora turned 18. At a cafe, she met Marco, a 31-year-old man whose charm and confidence immediately attracted her. At that time, she knew very little about him. He was divorced, had a sister, and seemed eager to start anew. However, beneath this appealing exterior was a troubled past. Marco had a reputation for aggressive behavior and issues with substance abuse, which had led to multiple encounters with the police. Despite these red flags, Sabora was drawn to his charisma and chose to ignore the warnings. A year into their relationship, Marco proposed that Sabora move with him to Spain, claiming that there were better job opportunities there than in Italy. Elisabetta tried to convince her against it, expressing doubts about Marco's intentions, but Sabora was determined. She believed this move would be the start of a new chapter where she and Marco could create a happy life together. Initially, Spain seemed like a great opportunity for Sabora and Marco. Sabora quickly secured a job as a waitress, while Marco found work as a pizza chef. They rented a cozy home, and Sabora shared her hopeful plans with her mother. Unfortunately, their stability didn't last long. Marco started losing job after job, often blaming his employers for his failures. His frustration and jealousy intensified, leading to a rise in his aggressive behavior, which escalated from small disagreements to serious conflicts. When Elisabetta visited Spain to check on Sabora, she was taken aback by the situation. Sabora, once vibrant, confident, now appeared withdrawn and subdued. Marco showed his irritation openly in Elisabetta's presence. Their arguments became louder. Despite these significant issues, Sabora continued to defend Marco, reassuring her mother that everything would get better. Those who knew Sabora were confused about why she ignored the warning signs in her relationship. She may have looked to Marco for the support and stability she missed during her childhood. When her family moved from Albania to Italy, they faced many challenges. Elisabetta worked hard to create a better life for her children, but Sabora had to take on adult responsibilities at a young age. Her relationship with Marco seemed like a way to fill the emotional gap, but instead, it added more stress. Life in Spain was becoming increasingly difficult for Sabora as her youthful dreams faded away. In July 2014, Sabora Gagani vanished unexpectedly, leaving her family in despair. The last time she was heard from was through a text message to Marco, her ex-partner, on July 7th. After that, her phone was off and her social media accounts were inactive, which was not typical for her. Earlier, Sabora had told her mother she had finally broken up with Marco, moved into a new apartment, and felt a sense of freedom. She compared it to a butterfly emerging from its cocoon. However, her abrupt silence worried everyone. The situation became even more puzzling when Marco showed up unexpectedly at Elisabetta's home in Italy. He tried to act like a concerned and remorseful man, claiming to care about what had happened. While having coffee, he told Elisabetta that he had no idea where Sabora might be. Marco explained that they had argued shortly before she vanished, and she had left without taking her belongings. However, he later changed his story, saying that a security guard at their apartment complex had seen Sabora leaving with 2 suitcases. These inconsistent statements raised more suspicions and increased worries. Elisabetta remembered that just a few days before, Sabora had decided to end her relationship with Marco for good after 3 years of attempts to fix things. Despite her efforts to distance herself from him, Marco remained persistently involved in her life. In early July, he unexpectedly called Elisabetta to ask if Sabora had returned to Italy. This question seemed strange to Elisabetta, especially considering Sabora's recent breakup and her repeated attempts to cut ties with Marco. Her mother recalled that, before, in 2013, Sabora had even gone back to her mother's home in Italy to leave everything behind, had realized that there was no future for her and Marco. However, Marco refused to let go. He traveled to Italy to see Sabora, begging her to give him another chance and promising to change, even proposing to her. Ultimately, exhausted by their turbulent relationship, Sabora succumbed to his promises. Unfortunately, the same cycle of jealousy, control, and aggressive behavior soon returned, disrupting her peace once again. At one point, Sabora told her mother that if she ever left Marco for good, she might have to disappear completely because she feared he wouldn't let her go. In the following months, Sabora made frequent trips to Italy, likely because her Spanish residency permit had expired. There were reports that she may have used a fake Italian ID for these travels. Elisabetta noticed her daughter appeared more and more scared, but Sabora rarely provided details about her situation. She only mentioned she was looking for a way to escape her troubles. Her family realized something was seriously wrong. Sabora would never cut off contact with them, especially with her mother and brothers. Now, all they could do was wait and hope that Sabora had chosen to go into hiding to escape Marco's grip. However, the conflicting stories and complete silence from her only raised more concerns. By 2015, the investigation into Sabora's disappearance had not made significant progress, despite the efforts of her family and law enforcement. Her mother, Elisabetta, was determined to file an official report with the authorities. She strongly believed that Marco, Sabora's ex-partner, was involved, as he was the last person known to have seen her before she disappeared. His behavior during the investigation only deepened suspicions. When questioned, Marco stuck to his story, claiming that Sabora left their home after an argument, after that they lost contact with each other. However, many of her personal items, including clothes and identification, remained in the apartment, which was strange. Despite his claims, Marco never reported her missing to the police. Instead, he claimed he tried to find her himself by printing and distributing flyers in their neighborhood. He also provided conflicting theories about where she might be, suggesting at one point that she had traveled to Argentina or had been seen with an unknown man with whom she allegedly had a confrontation. These statements were inconsistent and lacked credible evidence. Elisabetta, feeling distrustful of Marco, took matters into her own hands to find her daughter. She contacted the media and a specialized organization that helps raise awareness about missing persons cases. As a result, photos of Sabora and requests for information started appearing in both Italian and Spanish news outlets. However, these efforts did not lead to any new information. While Sabora's family continued to search for answers, Marco seemed to be living a fairly normal life. He changed his appearance by shaving his head and growing a beard, likely to avoid drawing attention. During this period, he entered into 2 new relationships, both of which ended due to the women complaining about his aggressive behavior. Nevertheless, Marco stayed in Spain, frequently going to the gym and joining a shooting club, which concerned those who knew his background. Sabora's family refused to lose hope. Elisabetta continually urged the police to step up their investigation. As a response, law enforcement began reviewing the case files to identify any overlooked details. They paid close attention to Marco's statements, which had seemed inconsistent from the start. Moreover, there were questions about why he hadn't contacted the police immediately after she went missing. As time went on, public interest in Sabora's case decreased. Despite her family's relentless search for answers, Marco, who was still in Spain, seemed to adapt to life after her disappearance. To his neighbors, he seemed friendly, focused on fitness and socializing. However, concerns about his character lingered due to his past relationship with Sabora and complaints from his new partners. While Sabora's family held on to hope for updates, the investigation remained stalled. Authorities broadened their search using international missing persons databases, but these efforts produced no leads. For those who knew Sabora well, the uncertainty about her fate was agonizing. By 2023, Marco seemed to have changed his life for the better. He was now living with a new partner, Paula, and they had a child together. Yet, beneath this seemingly fresh start, the same problems that troubled Marco for years persisted. His relationship with Paula was unstable. She confided in close friends and co-workers about experiencing physical abuse from him. During this time, Marco had difficulty maintaining a steady job, which made their financial situation worse. Over time, Paula became more aware of the challenges in Paula and Marco's relationship. She felt that Marco was not only aggressive at work but also unsupportive at home. Despite Paula's efforts to create the appearance of a normal life, her struggles were becoming apparent. For Paula, her primary goal was to save enough money to leave Marco and fight for her children's custody. Marco's situation was getting worse. He often told his master about his financial problems, stating he was working only for his family's sake. However, his aggressive behavior at work and inability to get along with co-workers made his master wonder if keeping him employed was worth the hassle. Meanwhile, Paula's friend noticed how serious Paula's situation was and encouraged her to stand up against the mistreatment. Despite this, Paula was too afraid to take any confrontational action. She confided in her friend that Marco had hit her 4 times and kicked her, but she minimized the seriousness of these incidents. This indicated that Paula needed immediate help. On Tuesday, May 16, 2023, Paula enjoyed her day off, excitedly sharing her plans for a relaxing evening with her coworkers. However, the next day, May 17th, took a tragic turn. Around 11:30 a.m., loud shouting came from the apartment that Paula shared with Marco. Although arguments were common between them, this time it sounded much more severe. Paula's voice was clearly heard, calling for help. Victor, Marco's landlord and boss, could hear a loud disturbance coming from her apartment. Worried, he hurried over with a co-worker from the restaurant. When they arrived at the door, they began knocking and shouting to find out what was going on inside. They heard soft sobbing, which then stopped abruptly. Shortly after, Marco opened the door, appearing calm, and told them everything was fine, saying Paula had just gone to bed. However, the absence of Paula's voice made Victor uneasy. This situation was particularly alarming given recent events. Just days earlier, Victor had fired Marco after a series of troubling incidents, including the mysterious disappearance of a kitchen knife. Victor had begun to distrust Marco and wanted to prevent any further issues. Now, Marco was involved in another troubling situation. While Victor went to get a spare key to the apartment, the co-worker called the police. Marco, seeming to recognize that the situation was getting serious, remained calm but acted unexpectedly. He suddenly left the apartment and walked out of the building without explanation. When the police arrived, they found the apartment locked. Victor soon returned with a spare key and entered the apartment to investigate further. Inside one of the rooms, they discovered Paula's body on the floor, stabbed 14 times. Her clothes were drenched in blood, and it was clear she had died several hours prior. The police secured the crime scene and called in forensic experts to gather evidence. They also began searching for Marco, who had fled the scene. Meanwhile, Paula's body was sent for an autopsy to determine the exact cause of death. Just a few hours later, Marco was found sitting calmly at a cafe table. He did not resist arrest and appeared unfazed by the situation. On May 20, 2023, 3 days after Paula's tragic death, Marco appeared in court. He was charged with a crime involving aggravating circumstances related to gender-based violence. The court ordered a psychiatric evaluation and substance testing. Marco was denied bail and remained in custody during the hearing. He chose to stay silent, only speaking to respond to his lawyer's questions. There was no mention of Sabora Gagani. However, just a few days after his arrest, Sabora's case gained attention again. Marco then made a surprising confession while being interrogated at the police station. He stated that during an argument in 2014, he had killed Sabora and hidden her body in the apartment they shared. Despite his confession, law enforcement decided to focus on the investigation into Paula's death first and postponed verifying Marco's claims about Sabora. Elisabetta, Sabora's mother, was devastated by the news of Marco's arrest and his admission about her daughter. For 9 years, she had advocated for a reopening of the investigation, convinced of Marco's involvement in Sabora's disappearance. Marco's confession led to the official reopening of Sabora's case, prompting investigators to validate his statements, starting with a look into the apartment where he and Sabora had lived in 2014. By early June 2023, Spanish investigators concentrating on Sabora's case meticulously examined the building layout where she and Marco had lived. A notable detail emerged: there was a large space that should have been part of the bedroom according to the building plans, but it was missing in reality. After receiving permission, investigators entered the apartment on June 6 and broke through the wall. They found a large wooden box filled with lime. Inside the box, police discovered important evidence: a plastic bag containing a knife with dried blood and personal items believed to belong to Sabora. Among these items was a wilted bouquet of flowers on top. The box also contained several plastic bags, one of which had a camping sleeping bag that held human remains. These remains were sent for forensic analysis to identify the person and determine the cause of death. To confirm the identity, Spanish authorities requested DNA samples from Sabora's family in Italy. On June 10, police visited the home of Sabora Gagani's mother, Elisabetta, to collect a saliva sample. The DNA results confirmed that the recovered remains belonged to Sabora. In the week that followed, new information about Marco's actions came to light. During interrogations in Spain, he claimed to have tried to dispose of the body using acid, but this claim could not be verified. Investigators observed that Marco often changed his statements. For Elisabetta, the confirmation of her daughter's remains was heartbreaking. After 9 years of uncertainty, she felt her hope had been taken away, although she had never stopped seeking answers about what happened to her daughter. Over the years, her life had changed significantly. Sabora's father passed away from illness without ever discovering the truth about his daughter. Although her efforts ultimately led to answers, they also brought a bittersweet feeling of closure. Forensic experts are continuing to analyze the evidence collected from the location where Sabora's remains were discovered. A knife found in a plastic bag has been sent for testing to check for biological traces that might connect it to Marco. At the same time, Spanish investigators are working with their Italian colleagues to gather additional materials related to Sabora's disappearance. Although there is evidence against him and he initially confessed to being involved in Sabora's death, including disclosing where her remains were located, he later took back his confession. Marco's lawyer claims that his statements were made under pressure and should not be accepted as evidence in court. Nevertheless, investigators argue that the items found in a hidden box, including Sabora's personal belongings, give them solid grounds for pursuing further charges. The investigation into Paula's death is still active, with Marco as the main suspect. In January 2024, several months after the discovery of Sabora's remains, her family was finally able to hold a burial after all forensic examinations were completed. Her remains were returned to her loved ones in Italy, where friends and family gathered to say their final goodbyes. As a tribute, they released balloons into the sky, each carrying heartfelt messages of hope and farewell. Meanwhile, significant attention was on the ongoing legal case against Marco, who was facing charges related to Paula's death. During a hearing on January 30, 2024, Marco presented a handwritten 17-page letter admitting his responsibility for Paula's death, but he included many conditions. He stated that the conflict stemmed from ongoing arguments about shared debts and her infidelity. Marco claimed that he used excessive force in self-defense during the altercation, which led to the tragedy. Marco admitted certain things about Paula, but he was unwilling to give detailed information about Sabora's case. He confirmed that he wrapped her body in plastic, placed it in a wooden box, covered it with flowers, added lime, and sealed it in a wall. However, he insisted that he was not responsible for her death, claiming that his actions were driven by fear of the situation. During the trial, Marco changed his story about how Sabora died, providing a completely different account. He claimed that the Albanian mafia, which he said he was involved with due to debts, was the one who killed her. According to Marco, he had borrowed €25,000 to start a brothel, but the money was stolen. When he couldn't repay the debt, he said 4 men came to his house, and during an argument, one of them killed Sabora. Marco stated that he was then threatened with his own life and forced to dispose of her body to avoid more trouble. This version of events raised serious concerns among investigators because Marco had changed his statements multiple times during the investigation. It became clear that he had lied to mislead authorities. There was no evidence to support his claims of mafia involvement. An autopsy revealed that Sabora had died from multiple stab wounds, indicating a violent crime. Sabora's family finally learned the truth about her fake years after she was reported missing. Her mother, Elisabetta, shared that she had spent the last 9 years hoping for answers. By May 2024, the trial for Paula's case was in progress, and the court moved forward with a jury trial to address charges of domestic violence and homicide. Meanwhile, Sabora's case had been reopened but had not yet gone to trial, as investigators continued to examine Marco's claims. Further court proceedings were expected. The experiences of Sabora Gagani and Paula illustrate the harmful effects of relationships characterized by manipulation and abuse. Sabora had aspirations for a promising future, while Paula was working to regain control of her life. Both women were negatively impacted by the same individual. Their stories remind us of the crucial need to identify the early signs of abusive behavior and take action to prevent further harm. Lorraine Cox was a 32-year-old woman living in Exeter, UK. She is dating a man named Ellie who lives in Scotland. Although the distance between them is quite long, they have gotten used to it. At first, they only met on weekends and talked, but gradually their feelings for each other grew deeper. By 2020, they had been in contact in this way for 2 years. Despite the challenges of the distance, they decided to get engaged. Now, they are building a future together and preparing for their wedding. Lorraine is also planning to have their first child. However, in early 2020, their plans had to change for several reasons. By February, Lorraine had moved to Scotland to be with Ellie, where she obtained a temporary visa, and they spent considerable time together. When summer arrived, she wanted to return to Exeter to visit her family and friends for a month or 2. This trip was not a breakup, she simply missed her loved ones. Afterward, she intended to return to Scotland and continue strengthening their relationship. Although restrictions in the UK remained strict, they were gradually relaxing, allowing public events to resume and many establishments to reopen. People eagerly took to the streets to socialize again, and Lorraine was no exception. On September 1, 2020, she arrived at her father's house in Exeter, excited to reconnect with friends. They spent the evening visiting several bars, enjoying drinks and good company, until they realized it was time to go home. Everyone left in a good mood. On September 2nd, Lorraine posted an unusual message on social media, claiming she was going to leave the country. This surprised everyone, as her only previous move had been to Scotland, and she had no plans to relocate again. She had just arrived to visit her father and intended to stay for at least a month. This sudden change in her mood and plans seemed out of character. In her post, Lorraine mentioned wanting to move about 50 kilometers from her father's house to a place called Plymouth, which she described as the first stop on her planned journey. This behavior was shocking because Lorraine was not known for making impulsive decisions, especially on such a significant scale. She had a stable life and a loving relationship in Scotland and had never mentioned wanting to move elsewhere. Now, she was considering a move toward France. Unsurprisingly, this post had a deep impact on Ellie. They had a strong relationship, making his fear of losing her understandable. Lorraine's friends bombarded her with questions. Initially, she responded willingly, but as the conversation progressed, her tone changed and mistrust grew. Those who knew her well noticed shifts in her writing style. She began using unfamiliar emojis, making odd mistakes, and her messages conveyed a sense of hostility. This worried her loved ones, as she had always maintained positive relationships with them, and there was no reason for her to display such aggression or undergo drastic life changes. Her father, Tony, who was hosting her during this time, even showed a family friend her old messages alongside the new ones. He pointed out clear inconsistencies in her writing style. Even those who didn't know her well noticed something was off. Throughout this time, Lorraine's boyfriend, who was named Ellie, was especially concerned and tried to understand her behavior. Initially, she responded to him with short, cold replies, but eventually, her answers became even more abrupt. The conversation ended when Lorraine sent him an emoji of a middle finger. This intensified the suspicion that someone else was using her account. Ellie had known Lorraine for 2 years, so the idea that the trip was related to a breakup or conflict seemed unlikely. They valued each other, which made her odd responses even more perplexing. Unfortunately, because of the distance, her boyfriend felt helpless and unable to intervene. A situation arose concerning Tony, Lorraine's father. Determined to discover the truth, he faced a challenge because he was away at the time and couldn't check his daughter's room for clues. Instead, he began speaking to Lorraine's friends, particularly those who had been with her the day before her sudden move to Plymouth. He was scheduled to return home the next day. Upon arriving home, Tony's first action was to go to Lorraine's room, where his suspicions grew stronger. He had already spoken with her close friends, and they all confirmed that no one had seen Lorraine since their breakup at the bar when everyone had left for the night. Inside Lorraine's room, it appeared as though she had never returned after her outing with friends. Her belongings from Scotland remained untouched, and nothing was missing from her room. It looked as if she had left for an extended trip without taking any of her things, which seemed impossible. The most alarming discovery was the bag she had left behind. Lorraine had diabetes and always carried a first aid kit to monitor her blood sugar levels. Her health depended on these supplies, and she never went anywhere, even for a quick trip to the store, without them. For outings like the one to the bar, she typically used a smaller bag. The fact that her larger kit was still in her room raised serious concerns about her recent plans. Tony realized that his daughter had not returned from the party, leading him to fear that something might have happened to her health. The messages she had exchanged with friends and relatives also seemed troubling. Worried, Tony sent another message to Lorraine on social media, expressing concern for her health and asking if she was okay. He warned her that if she did not respond, he would have to contact the police. The message was seen, but he received no reply. After that, Tony's and Lorraine's friends could no longer tolerate the uncertainty and began their search. They started by looking for clues in the bar where they had spent the evening on September 2nd. They interviewed witnesses, distributed flyers, and retraced the presumed route Lorraine would have taken home. It was clear that something alarming must have happened during her journey since she never came home again. Law enforcement and journalists quickly became involved. They were skeptical of the theory that Lorraine might have suffered a health crisis. Detectives believed that if that were the case, she would not have been able to send messages to her friends. Furthermore, several days had passed since her disappearance, and she would likely have been found in a hospital, but tests of recent admissions yielded no results. It appeared far more likely that Lorraine had encountered danger from someone. Journalists rushed to report on the situation, highlighting concerns over Lorraine's disappearance. They recalled that in May 2018, 2 years before Lorraine vanished, an attacker named Robert Proud had attacked a woman who strikingly resembled her. He had abused her but did not kill her, and then evaded capture for a long time. Given his criminal history, it raised fears that there could be more victims. Although he had completed his prison sentence, investigators began considering Lorraine as a potential victim. At the time of her disappearance, Robert was living near the path Lorraine would have taken home. This connection led to his arrest, and police sought to extract a confession from him. They believed he had kidnapped, abused, and possibly killed her, and that he might have disposed of her body. It was suspected that he took her phone and pretended to communicate with her friends and family to buy himself time and create confusion. There was another theory regarding Lorraine's disappearance. Some believed that Robert might have attacked her, but instead of dying, she was hiding to avoid becoming his victim again. The detectives prioritized finding Lorraine because she was clearly in danger. Robert might have been holding her hostage. The situation could have escalated, posing a significant threat. To test this theory, they began reviewing surveillance footage from cameras along Lorraine's potential route that night. Even after narrowing down the time frame, they had about 11,000 hours of footage from over 400 cameras across 120 different locations. Analyzing this footage was time-consuming, but it proved worthwhile, yielding the first clues needed to catch the criminal. Eventually, they spotted a girl who matched Lorraine's description in the recordings. After leaving her friends at the bar, she headed toward her father's house without making any turns. She almost made it home, but a few blocks away, something caught her attention: a kebab shop on the ground floor of an apartment building, which was open at night. Lorraine went inside, likely to grab a snack, and then left to eat on a bench before continuing her way home. Around 2:45 a.m., she returned to the kebab shop, but this time accompanied by an unfamiliar man. This raised alarms because he didn't appear to be just a random passerby. The footage suggested they had interacted, and he had managed to get her attention. The police continued to investigate the recordings and noted that the young man had been following Lorraine after they left the shop. This behavior was concerning, especially since she seemed to be walking voluntarily and the street was deserted. Detectives suspected the man might be a predator who targeted his victim, potentially involved in Lorraine's disappearance and the messages she had sent to her loved ones after the incident. He maintained a distance while following her, trying to remain inconspicuous, and seemed to be assessing the situation. It looked as though he was stalking her, especially since she appeared intoxicated and was stumbling. She had a valuable phone, and with no one accompanying her that night, he saw an opportunity to attack. The police attempted to locate another recording to determine how Lorraine left the building from at least one camera, but were unsuccessful. It appeared she had not exited at all. They spent considerable time reviewing the video footage, only to confirm that Lorraine had not left since she was last seen. The detectives concluded that she might still be inside, possibly being held against her will. Unfortunately, by the time they gathered this information, 8 days had passed. Given this long duration, only a miracle could save Lorraine, who suffered from diabetes. Nevertheless, her family held on to hope. The police obtained a clear photo of the man who accompanied and followed Lorraine that night. They printed it out and began distributing it through the media to attract witnesses. Initially, they visited the kebab shop and spoke with the owner. He informed them that he lived above the shop but had rented the apartment below to a young man about a month ago. This young man had moved in unofficially and was very withdrawn, to the extent that the owner didn't know much about him. The owner even expressed doubts about the young man's name. When police officers visited the apartment, they anticipated finding a crime scene. However, everything was surprisingly neat and clean. The young man living there identified himself as Christopher Mayer and showed them his identification. There was no sign of Lorraine in the apartment, and he allowed the detectives inside without any resistance. They inspected the place thoroughly to ensure that no one was being held against their will. Christopher was then shown a photo of Lorraine, along with a CCTV image in which a man resembling him was seen accompanying her to the house. He strongly denied any connection, claiming that he did not know her. However, the clear photograph made the police skeptical, as the similarities were unmistakable. A brief verbal confrontation ensued, with Christopher maintaining his stance. During this exchange, he insisted that he would never bring a strange woman to his apartment. The police then became interested in Christopher's mobile phone, which they seized for examination. They discovered that it contained Lorraine's SIM card, although the card was currently missing. This evidence confirmed that he had at least seen her recently. Further investigation revealed that a suspicious post had been made on Lorraine's social media account using this mobile phone. It appeared that Christopher had sent strange messages to her loved ones. After the unsettling incident, whatever it was, he had taken Lorraine's phone. Rather than using it for communication, he inserted a SIM card into his own phone to access her contact list and social media account. This raised further suspicions about Christopher. He was the last person confirmed to have seen Lorraine alive, and his attempts to manipulate her account seemed suspicious. It became clear that he was trying to cover his tracks, raising questions about his motives that the authorities still needed to uncover. Christopher was arrested and charged with the kidnapping of Lorraine Cox. That same day, forensic experts arrived at his apartment to investigate. They used a substance called luminol to carefully examine the area. While they found several suspicious traces of evidence, the most alarming findings were in a nearby alley. During their search of the apartment, they discovered blood and numerous signs that supported the theory that Lorraine was dead, particularly around a garbage can. The forensic team speculated that Christopher might have disposed of evidence by throwing away the body. They searched the alley and found a large plastic bag inside one of the trash containers that contained human remains. However, it was not a complete body. Some parts, including the torso and head, were missing, making identification difficult. Consequently, the case shifted from a missing persons investigation to a murder investigation, and the work continued. Detectives learned that on the night of Lorraine's disappearance, in addition to Christopher, 5 other young men were present. However, none appeared on the CCTV footage with Lorraine. These men likely entered the apartment to buy food or for other reasons, but their involvement needed further investigation. They could have unwittingly been present during the crime or could have assisted in covering up evidence. Notably, the group behaved very differently. Except for Christopher, everyone was cooperative and willing to provide information. Upon further investigation, the 5 other young men were found to be locals who lived nearby. Since there was no evidence against them, they were released. In stark contrast, Christopher was uncooperative, reluctant to talk, and often gave vague or confusing answers. He seemed to believe that the police lacked sufficient evidence against him, but they soon discovered that his real name was Azam Mangori. This revelation marked a turning point in the investigation, as detectives confronted him with the truth, signaling the beginning of the unraveling of his story. Azam claims that he changed his name because he was born in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, where people who do not follow tradition can face severe punishment, including being stoned to death. As an adult, he left his conservative homeland but still lives in fear of being hunted down and killed. To avoid this dangerous situation, he began calling himself Christopher. He had been living illegally in the UK since December 2018 to avoid returning to Iraq. Azam also possessed a high-quality fake ID under the name Christopher Mayer to evade detection by immigration authorities. This explains why the landlord knew almost nothing about the man. He was very cautious, had not attended school or worked anywhere, and lived off odd jobs. However, the interrogation ended abruptly. After admitting to these things, he refused to talk about Lorraine. His previous admissions were not significant to the police. DNA testing confirmed that the remains found in a trash bin were those of Lorraine. In Azam's apartment, DNA traces and other evidence indicated that Lorraine had been killed there because Azam had failed to clean thoroughly. The police also discovered a large handsaw and replacement blades purchased after the crime. Other items found included a driver's license, a debit card, and a wallet, all mutilated. Nearby trash bins contained bloody clothing, Lorraine's phone, and a SIM card discarded in the sewer. Unfortunately, parts of her body were never recovered. Detectives analyzed the location data from Azam's mobile phone on the day of Lorraine's murder and the subsequent days when he disposed of evidence. This investigation led them to a location on the city's outskirts known as Tin Pit Hill. During the search, they found Lorraine's torso and head, which were not well concealed. Investigators noted unsettling details. A piece of clothing was stuffed into her mouth, and a patch of skin was missing from her back, possibly taken as a trophy by the perpetrator. Unfortunately, no other body parts were located, and the remains were in an advanced state of decomposition, complicating the determination of the cause of death. The forensic expert concluded that Lorraine had likely been strangled. Despite strong evidence of his guilt, Azam continued to deny his involvement and created false stories. He even attempted to involve banned organizations in the case. The trial commenced in spring 2021. Although he never confessed, Azam and his defense team significantly altered his narrative. He now claimed to have a normal orientation and stated that he encountered Lorraine when she came to his place late at night after a bar visit. He approached her on the street and convinced her to come to his apartment for some intimacy. Azam maintained that Lorraine voluntarily came to his apartment after drinking heavily and using illegal substances. He claimed that after trying those substances himself, he experienced severe distortion of perception and lost consciousness. When he regained awareness, he found Lorraine in the bathroom, unresponsive. He alleged that he saw a puddle of urine beneath her and believed she had overdosed. Azam attempted to perform CPR, but it was unsuccessful. In a panic and without knowing the emergency number, he sat on the bathroom floor next to her body. Hallucinations then began, and he claimed to see dark creatures emerging from her mouth, prompting him to shove a piece of his t-shirt into her mouth to stop it. He pushed the cloth in so far that it could have caused her to choke. Despite being in a state of panic, he managed to find and send a video he had recorded around the same time to a friend, where he appeared calm and even exhaled smoke into the camera. He explained that he filmed the video to help himself calm down. His behavior grew increasingly bizarre. Instead of calling for help, he decided to dispose of the body and planned to flee from his relatives. Naturally, this account sounded implausible, leaving him with no solid defense. According to Azam, he was unsure what he would do after Lorraine died and kept her body in his apartment until he decided to dispose of it. When his anxiety reached its peak, he chose to throw it away. He called a taxi to take the bag with the remains to a wooded area on the outskirts of Exeter. Prosecutors noted that he seemed to be obsessed with amputation, as evidenced by the precise cuts he made, which horrified forensic experts. It was clear he had researched this topic extensively and was well prepared. That evening, Azam tried to connect with people on an escort website, seeking companionship but was unsuccessful. Later, he saw Lorraine on the street eating alone and viewed her as an ideal target. It seems that Azam may have premeditated this murder to fulfill his dark fantasies. Even with substantial evidence against him, his trial lasted 5 weeks. Ultimately, the jury found him guilty of murder and attempting to obstruct justice. He received a life sentence but is eligible for parole after 20 years, which means he could be released at the age of 44. Lorraine's boyfriend, Ellie, experienced profound grief, stating that a part of him died with her. He lives daily with this pain and struggles against despair. Lorraine's father, Tony, organized a charity march to rally support for his daughter. Participants silently walked the route she would have taken from the bar to her home, a journey she never completed. In the aftermath, Tony became an activist advocating for more CCTV cameras on UK streets to help prevent and solve violent crimes. He also started to make regular donations to an anti-abuse organization based in the UK. Even after justice was served, Lorraine Cox's family remained uncertain about how Azam was able to lure her into his apartment. Security footage showed her following him willingly. Azam claimed that he engaged her in conversation and offered her alcohol and a banned substance, which she accepted. However, toxicology reports found no traces of banned substances in her system, and a forensic expert stated that she did not die from diabetes, suggesting that Azam's account might be false. Sadly, the truth about what happened in his apartment may never be revealed, as only Azam and Lorraine know what truly occurred. Some believe Azam exploited Lorraine's kindness by asking for help, and that she may have felt unable to refuse, ultimately leading her into a dangerous situation. On the morning of May 17, 2005, a 911 call came from a quiet home in Alexandria, Kentucky. A woman was screaming, claiming that someone had broken in and shot her husband. When the police arrived, they found the house in chaos. Drawers were pulled open, items were scattered everywhere, and broken glass covered the floor. In the bedroom, they discovered a man's body. Initially, it appeared to be a botched robbery, but something felt off about the situation. The children provided different accounts of the event, raising suspicion. Then, the police uncovered a crucial piece of evidence hidden deep inside the washing machine that changed the investigation. What truly happened in the Bosley home that morning? Robert Bob Bosley was born on August 6, 1962, in the small town of Alexandria, Kentucky. He grew up in a close-knit, religious family with his siblings. From an early age, Bob demonstrated a sharp intellect and a strong ambition. Although much of his early life is not well documented, it is clear that he started planning his future before he even became an adult. Bob dreamed of becoming wealthy and owning his own business. He began by offering chimney cleaning and minor roof repairs. With long hours, affordable rates, and a strong work ethic, he gained a reputation as a reliable and friendly worker. His hard work paid off. Eventually, Bob expanded his one-man operation into a successful business, Bosley Roofing and Chimney Sweep in Alexandria. Under his management, the company became known for its quality and reliability, attracting loyal customers and generating impressive profits. With a growing influx of money, Bob aimed for even greater success. He started buying rental properties, eventually owned about 20. These investments significantly increased his income, making him one of the most successful businessmen in the area. His newfound wealth allowed him to enjoy a lavish lifestyle, complete with sports cars, horses, an airplane, a large boat, and a collection of expensive firearms. His boat, frequently spotted on Lake Cumberland, became known for hosting wild adult parties filled with alcohol, music, and scantily dressed attendees. Bob met 18-year-old Amy at one of his favorite local restaurants. Amy, also from Alexandria, grew up in a working-class family and faced financial challenges, especially due to her father's struggles with alcohol. Despite these difficulties, she was determined to create a better life for herself. After graduating high school with top honors in 1986, Amy enrolled in business studies at a community college affiliated with Northern Kentucky University. To support her education, she worked as a waitress, where she met Bob. He was older, wealthy, and charming. Initially shy, Amy soon became captivated by his lifestyle. She began attending his infamous lake parties and quickly became a close friend of his. Eventually, Amy won Bob's heart. After 4 years of dating, they got married. This was a major change for Amy, who had transformed from her modest beginnings to marrying one of the most eligible bachelors in the area. They then started a family, welcoming their daughter Morgan in 1996 and their son Trevor 3 years later. Amy transitioned from her carefree party days to fully embrace her new role as a dedicated mother, swapping late nights at the lake for school events and parenting responsibilities. Bob was expanding his business and investments, but he found one aspect particularly frustrating: administration. Managing payroll, taxes, invoices, and contractors felt burdensome to him. He preferred spending time by the lake rather than being stuck in an office. On weekends, he often disappeared on his boat for days at a time, keeping his location a secret. Friends later noted that Bob seemed to be distancing himself from his family, becoming more involved in a life of indulgence, secrecy. Since Amy had a background in business administration, he asked her to take over the company's financial and administrative tasks. Initially, she was hesitant, but she eventually agreed. From that point on, Amy took charge of managing the company's finances, payroll, and tax responsibilities. The Bosleys seemed to be doing exceptionally well, living in a charming log cabin in the woods south of Alexandria while their dream home was being built close by. This future home was impressive, featuring 14 acres, stained glass windows, a stone tower, and Gothic gargoyles. To everyone else, the Bosleys represented the American dream. They were good-looking, successful, generous with their time, actively involved in their church and their children's school. Bob was known for donating services to low-income families, earning respect throughout the community. However, beneath this fairy tale facade lay a troubling reality. As the administrator, Amy had access to the company's complete financial situation. While Bob focused on expanding the business, the lake, and building their dream home, Amy secretly started redirecting company funds. Instead of paying taxes, she funneled the money into a personal account that was hidden from view. For years, this embezzlement went unnoticed, but the IRS eventually caught on. They sent multiple letters, made phone calls, and tried to schedule meetings, but Bob never received any of these communications. Amy had ensured that all IRS correspondence was sent to a private mailbox she controlled, fully aware that the government was closing in but thinking she could delay things indefinitely. On the morning of Tuesday, May 17, 2005, just days before their 15th wedding anniversary, everything changed. Around 5 a.m., Amy Bosley made a frantic 911 call. Her panicked voice filled the line until the call was abruptly interrupted by a loud crash. The dispatchers attempted to reconnect. Shortly after, law enforcement rushed to the Bosley cabin. When they arrived, they found Amy in shock, holding her children. Her sister soon arrived to take care of the kids while Amy was taken in for questioning. Police secured the area and contacted the crime scene unit. As daylight broke, more officers arrived to search the nearby forest with K-9 units and a helicopter, looking for what they suspected was a fleeing intruder. In the bedroom, they found Bob's lifeless body. He was kneeling beside the bed, leaning forward, and had multiple gunshot wounds. However, only 2 shell casings were found in the room, which added to the confusion. As detectives examined the evidence, they started to doubt the authenticity of the crime scene and the entire narrative surrounding it. Except for the children's rooms, the rest of the house was chaotic. Kitchen cabinets were left wide open, including those under the sink, which seemed odd for a thief to rummage through. A rear door had a broken window, indicating a potential entry point, but surprisingly, most of the broken glass was outside rather than inside. This inconsistency raised suspicions from the beginning. The disorder continued elsewhere in the house. In the bathroom, the mirrored cabinet was open, and prescription bottles were strewn across the floor. It appeared more like a staged mess than the result of a rushed intruder. According to Amy's 911 call, the alleged attacker had left quickly, so why was there such a mess? As crime scene investigators examined the house, detectives began interviewing Amy Bosley at the police station. She seemed shaken and at times distressed, but appeared confused, as if she was having trouble remembering the details of her story. Amy described the intruder as a white male with a nasal voice, bad breath, and a strong odor of urine. She claimed he burst in during the night. He attacked both her and Bob. She had 2 marks on her chest, which she said were from the assault. When detectives asked who might have wanted to harm Bob, Amy indicated that he wasn't very popular, suggesting he had a wild reputation that could have led to enemies among disgruntled employees. She specifically mentioned a contractor and longtime friend of Bob, as someone with whom Bob had recently had a disagreement. However, the friend was quickly ruled out as a suspect. He had a solid alibi and was very upset about Bob's death. Panic spread throughout the Alexandria community as schools were closed for several days due to the fear of a killer at large. Residents struggled to accept that Bob, a kind and generous man known for his willingness to help others, had been brutally murdered in his own home. Meanwhile, detectives at the cabin searched for clues. They found only 2 shell casings near Bob's body, despite multiple gunshot wounds, prompting them to look in the basement. There, in the family's washing machine, they discovered wet clothing and, at the bottom, a folded cloth with 4 additional shell casings. It was puzzling. Why would a fleeing killer hide evidence in a washing machine inside the victim's home? Even more unusual was an aluminum baseball bat found nearby, showing fresh scratches and white residue. Further lab analysis would be necessary to understand its potential relevance. Amy has been released and can now reunite with her children, but new details are emerging. The crime scene looks suspiciously arranged. Valuables, including large amounts of cash, were left alone. Amy's emotional reaction seems insincere. She showed no tears or genuine sorrow. Investigators believe there may be hidden motives. Then, a significant development occurred. IRS staff visited the station after learning about Bob's death. They had been trying to reach him for months regarding an enormous unpaid tax bill of over $1.7 million. A meeting was set for the day Bob died. The IRS agents also revealed an odd detail. During a previous call, they had spoken to someone who claimed to be Bob, but the voice sounded strange, high-pitched and unnatural. They suspected it was a woman pretending to be a man, and that voice may have belonged to Amy. The motive is now clear. Amy, who was responsible for managing the company's finances, had embezzled millions of dollars by redirecting tax payments into her personal account. Bob, completely unaware of her actions, he will learn the truth as soon as the IRS is ready to confront him. To make matters worse, there were allegations of Bob's infidelities. His sister later told investigators that she overheard Amy say she would shoot Bob if he ever cheated on her or left her. At the time, it seemed like a joke, but it now felt like a serious threat. Despite the growing evidence against her, Amy Bosley continues to deny any involvement in her husband's murder. During her second interrogation, she insists that she loved Bob, even though their marriage had its issues. She acknowledges that they faced problems, as many couples do, but argues there was no reason for her to harm the father of her children. Investigators, however, have a different perspective. Ballistics tests confirm that all 6 bullets that hit Bob correspond to 6 casings found, 2 in the bedroom and 4 concealed in the washing machine. A crucial development in the investigation occurred when Morgan and Trevor Bosley, ages 9 and 6, were interviewed separately. Both children provided the same description of the events. They had gone to bed peacefully but were suddenly awakened by the sound of 6 gunshots, followed by the sound of glass breaking. In contrast, Amy reported that the glass broke first and then the shots rang out, indicating inconsistencies in her story. Additionally, the scratches on her chest, which she claimed were from a struggle with the intruder, raised suspicions. The marks were too symmetrical, resembling staged wounds rather than genuine defensive injuries. A closer look at her blouse revealed that it hadn't been torn during the supposed attack. Instead, it had been carefully cut with scissors and then ripped to make it look damaged. Less than 2 weeks after Bob was murdered, authorities arrested Amy Bosley and charged her with the crime. However, there was one critical piece of evidence still missing: the murder weapon. Eventually, the weapon was found, but the circumstances of its discovery are unclear. One account states that a pistol from Bob's gun collection was discovered hidden in Amy's handbag, behind a wardrobe. Another version suggests that the weapon was found later by Amy's sister, who had taken care of Amy's children and belongings that night. While going through Amy's purse, she allegedly found the gun and promptly informed a lawyer, who then turned it over to the police. Regardless of how it was obtained, ballistic testing confirmed that the gun matched the 6 shell casings found at the crime scene and in the laundry. Although the bullets recovered from Bob's body were too damaged to establish a direct match, the circumstantial evidence against Amy was substantial. As the trial opened, prosecutors presented a straightforward and damaging story. For years, Amy had secretly embezzled money from Bob's company by diverting tax payments to herself. She had managed to evade the IRS through mail redirection and deceit, but her luck had finally run out. On May 17, 2005, Bob was set to meet with IRS agents who were insisting on explanations. Amy understood what this meeting signified: being exposed, facing divorce, and possible prison time. In response, the once respected wife, mother, and community volunteer came up with a desperate plan. The night before her meeting with the IRS, Amy, with her children asleep nearby, quietly took one of Bob's guns. Some sources claim she sedated the children first. While Bob was asleep, she shot him. Although wounded, he woke up and tried to defend himself. Investigators noted the way he was injured suggested he lunged at her, unaware that she was the one holding the gun. In shock and bleeding, Bob was unable to overpower her. She attacked him again. By the end of the incident, Bob Bosley, who had built his wealth from nothing, and who had put his trust in Amy, was dead in the home they were planning to share. Amy, who once supported him, now faced charges for orchestrating his murder, not out of fear, but out of greed. Bob Bosley's carefully built life of luxury and respect crumbled in one night due to cold calculations. What was left was a broken family, a shocked community, and an unforgettable legacy of betrayal. She smashed the back glass door with a baseball bat, rifled through cabinets and drawers to create the illusion of a burglary. Next, she concealed 4 spent bullet casings wrapped in cloth at the bottom of the washing machine. To make her injuries look real, Amy lightly cut her chest with what appeared to be scissors and slashed her blouse to suggest a struggle. Finally, she concluded her act with a 911 call, her voice filled with panic and the scene meticulously staged. Forensic evidence presented a different perspective on the case. Laboratory tests showed that glass fragments found on the aluminum bat matched the pieces from the broken rear door. The bat, which Amy's children recognized as belonging to their family, had not been used by an intruder. Instead, it was used by Amy herself. The police found no footprints, vehicle tracks, or any signs of anyone fitting the description Amy gave. No one had entered or left the house that night. Investigators also uncovered details about the Bosleys' marriage. Amy believed Bob had cheated on her. Photos discovered in their safe, taken during wild parties at Lake Cumberland, revealed a secret lifestyle and confirmed at least one affair. While the emotional pain of betrayal was evident, the real motive ran much deeper. Amy had embezzled the large amount of money from Bob's company by skimming off funds and failing to pay taxes. She thought that by killing him, she could keep her secret safe. Without Bob, his assets could cover the debt, allowing her to keep the remaining funds. The defense argued that the bullet casings could have come from Bob's pockets after a trip to the shooting range, but the evidence against Amy continued to mount. Despite this, her lawyer pointed out that there were no eyewitnesses, no DNA evidence, and no clear connection between the bullet casings and the bullets found in Bob's body. This ambiguity provided a chance to influence the jury's decision. Fearing that Amy might be acquitted and wanting to protect the Bosley children from the trauma of testifying against their mother, the prosecutors offered a plea deal. This would allow Amy to avoid a trial, spare her children the emotional strain, and receive a lighter sentence. In return, she would admit her guilt without revealing what had happened to the stolen millions. On November 2, 2006, Amy Bosley appeared in a Campbell County courtroom wearing a green and white prison jumpsuit. Her expression was impossible to read. Before the sentencing took place, Bob's family spoke directly to her. His brother accused her of being a liar and a fraud, warning her that although she might gain her freedom one day, she would never escape the memories of her actions. He reminded her that every night, she would see Bob's face and remember the tears of his children who were left without a father. Bob's sister fixed her gaze on Amy and asked the haunting question that troubled them all: did he beg you to stop? The answer would never be known. Next, Bob's mother approached, heartbroken and shaking, as she read a letter expressing her grief for the final goodbye that never happened. Amy remained silent, looking down and wiping away her tears. The judge acknowledged the damage Amy had caused, not just to her husband, but also to her children, her community, and her own future. He sentenced her to 20 years in prison. According to Kentucky law, she would be eligible for parole after serving 85% of her sentence, which equated to 17 years in prison. On May 18, 2022, exactly 17 years after Bob was murdered, Amy Bosley, who was 54 at the time, was released from the Kentucky Correctional Institution for Women. Most news outlets barely covered her release, and her current whereabouts are unknown. Some speculate that she may be trying to find the millions of dollars she had embezzled. Bob is buried at St. Stephen Cemetery in Campbell County, Kentucky. He is remembered for his kindness, ambition, and dedication to his family, tragically killed by someone he trusted deeply. In retrospect, Amy's choices appear both tragic and irrational. She was not in financial distress, and her husband was not abusive. The IRS may have offered a solution to her financial issues, or if she sought revenge, a divorce could have made her wealthier and free. Instead, she opted for murder. Marilena Rosari was a 58-year-old woman living with her husband in Castellanza, Italy. They had 2 grown daughters who lived on their own and had children of their own, making Marilena a grandmother. She worked as a promoter in supermarkets located in the province of Varese. By 2017, she viewed herself as a successful individual, enjoying a peaceful life while taking care of her family. On Sunday, July 30th, 2017, Marilena and her husband visited a mutual friend's house for dinner in a nearby town. They spent a few hours there before returning home together to Castellanza. It was a typical quiet evening for them. However, once they arrived home, her husband had other plans. He planned to visit his elderly mother in the nearby town, as she was unwell and needed help with housework. He was absent all evening and night, returning home the next morning around 10:30 a.m. He expected to find his wife at home since she usually left for work later. Typically, at that time, she would be enjoying her morning routine, having breakfast, getting ready, and occasionally doing some cleaning. To his surprise, Marilena was missing. Initially, her husband thought she might have gone to work earlier than usual, possibly due to a last-minute request. However, Marilena always communicated any changes to her schedule and would not just disappear without notice. Moreover, that morning, she had planned to spend time with him to discuss their future plans and some important matters. He started to feel anxious and tried to reach Marilena. After several unsuccessful attempts to call her mobile phone, he noticed it was turned off, which was unusual for her as she was always reachable during work hours. When he checked the house, he discovered more worrying signs. Her bag containing personal items and documents was missing, but her car was parked in the yard. This was strange since she never left without her car. Concerned, he went outside to look around the neighborhood. He talked to several neighbors who were awake and working in their gardens, but none of them had seen or heard anything unusual. He also called his daughters, but they had not heard from their mother either. Marilena's phone still remained off. Feeling restless, he decided to contact the police. However, they informed him that they could not file a missing person report until 24 hours had passed. It was not until July 31st, when he returned to the police station, that his report was finally accepted and the search began. During this time, he couldn't get in touch with Marilena. He reached out to everyone who knew her, including her daughters, relatives, and colleagues, but no one had seen her. By the time the police acknowledged the report of her disappearance, the management and staff at the supermarkets were already worried because she hadn't shown up for work in 2 days. Marilena was known for her punctuality and reliability. She never missed a shift, so her absence raised great concern. The police interviewed all of Marilena's co-workers. They were shocked by her disappearance and found no indications that anything was wrong. No one was aware of any issues she might have been dealing with, nor did it seem like she had plans for a long trip or any reason to leave unexpectedly. The last person to see and talk to Marilena was her husband, making him the first person law enforcement wanted to question. Detectives interviewed him multiple times to understand what happened before her disappearance. They aimed to find out if the couple had any issues that might have led Marilena to leave or if anyone harbored ill will toward her. Her husband found these suggestions ridiculous and dismissed them, stating that their family had never been involved in crime or shady activities, and they did not have any enemies. Detectives interviewed Marilena's friends and found that they had no useful information. Her husband mentioned one concerning detail: the family was facing financial troubles, owing €10,000 to the bank. However, this lead seemed unhelpful since they were consistently making payments on the loan. He also provided documentation proving that both he and Marilena were fulfilling their financial obligations without issues. The police explored various possibilities, ranging from a voluntary disappearance to a potential crime, but after several days, they had no concrete answers. Meanwhile, Marilena had not used her phone or bank cards, raising concerns about her well-being, as it's difficult for anyone to survive long without money, a phone, or a car. A press conference was held to gather more information about Marilena's disappearance, and a television appeal was broadcasted to raise awareness. The prosecutor's office requested a detailed description of the missing woman, which was shared on all channels along with a call for eyewitnesses to come forward. Unfortunately, this effort did not lead to any new information. To assist with the search, specially trained dogs were brought in. The dogs were taken around the house and the area by the gate, but they remained calm and did not indicate any scent. The courtyard and Marilena's car were also searched without any success. Additionally, Marilena's relatives appeared on television, made several public statements, and directly reached out to her in hopes of getting a response. Days went by, but Marilena was still missing. The critical timeframe for finding her alive had passed, and anxiety deepened as troubling thoughts arose. Her husband and daughters felt increasingly worried. Law enforcement still issued a nationwide appeal through various media to widen the search efforts. Meanwhile, relatives created and distributed flyers featuring Marilena's photo throughout the city. A week later, the police had almost lost hope of finding her alive and shifted their focus to the surrounding area, trying to identify anyone who might have been involved in her possible murder or kidnapping. Naturally, close relatives, especially her husband, became suspects. He was the last known person to have spent time with her. He claimed he was at his mother's house during the time she went missing, which raised suspicions. After appearing on television, he acted cautiously, seemingly avoiding drawing attention to himself. He explained this behavior by saying he wanted to evade media scrutiny, but law enforcement grew suspicious that there might be a more concerning reason behind his actions. Consequently, they began to investigate him more thoroughly. Detectives confirmed that the evening after her husband brought her home, he went to help his sick mother with housework. Neighbors saw them arrive together, and several witnesses confirmed that he left almost immediately afterward. He was not seen again until the next morning. Neighbors near his mother's house also supported his story, stating he arrived late in the evening, and the timing matched perfectly. CCTV cameras along the road recorded his car traveling to and from his mother's house at the times he mentioned. His alibi appeared solid and did not raise any suspicions. However, investigators were not quick to remove him from the list of suspects, as close acquaintances are often implicated in such cases. Therefore, they returned to that neighborhood hoping to gather more information from former neighbors. Local residents were interviewed, and detectives meticulously investigated Marilena's previous social circle to find any suspicious individuals who might have had an interest in the kidnapping or potential violent actions. At this stage, her husband appeared to be an unlikely suspect for several reasons. He and his wife were widely regarded as loving partners with minimal disagreements. He had no financial incentive to cause her harm, and he had a solid alibi. Meanwhile, the investigation continued to progress as new leads surfaced. After speaking with the couple's acquaintances at their former residence, the Carabinieri shifted their focus to Vito Clerico, a 64-year-old man who was well acquainted with Marilena and her husband, lived nearby. From the outset, Vito displayed a cautious demeanor and seemed anxious. During questioning, he changed his story multiple times, which raised significant suspicions. The investigation team focused on Marilena's neighbor to gather more information. Background checks revealed that he had no criminal record, and his relationship with Marilena did not initially cause any concerns. A mutual friend mentioned that they met at work when Marilena was a promoter at shopping centers. This was Vito working as a storekeeper at Marilena's workplace. Their jobs frequently brought them together, leading to regular communication. The friend described Vito as irresponsible, noting that he had a history of borrowing large amounts of money from others and either not repaying it or repaying it late. There were also rumors that Marilena had lent him money during their time together, which could suggest a possible motive for the crime. As a result, he was called in for questioning. During the interview at the station, Vito described receiving a call from Marilena on the night she disappeared. She asked to meet him at the station in Garbagnac Milanese, explaining that her husband was visiting his sick mother and could not assist her. She mentioned having important business in the city. Vito, Being friends with her, agreed to meet, but Marilena never showed up. Initially, he thought she changed her mind and went home. However, several aspects of his story seem suspicious. First, the timing was too late for any business dealings. Second, the timeline Vito provided did not align with the information the police had confirmed. According to the timeline, Marilena should have been preparing to go to the station while she was with her friends, but no one confirmed that she had any plans to go anywhere or contacted anyone. Additionally, since her husband was nearby, she could have asked him for help. All of this seemed illogical. Due to these inconsistencies, detectives decided to investigate Vito's account further. They discovered that his mobile phone was never registered on the route he claimed to have taken. Furthermore, he was not seen on any surveillance cameras, including those at the station. If Vito was telling the truth, he should have appeared on video. The most intriguing discovery was that the detectives found a woman in the recordings who looked like Marilena. This indicated that she had indeed visited Garbanyake Milanese, from which she never returned. Upon examining Vito's mobile phone, the detectives confirmed that he had received several calls in the days leading up to her disappearance. Marilena had repeatedly tried to contact him, but he had consistently ignored her. However, on the night she disappeared, there was no call from her to him. Instead, there was a single outgoing call from Vito to her number on the evening of July 30th, 2017. This evidence directly contradicted his account of events. During the conversation, one of the detectives spotted dark red stains on Vito's trousers that looked like blood. Vito quickly claimed that he raised rabbits and that the stains might have come from butchering one of them, as he owned around 40 rabbits. However, the police doubted his story, confiscated the trousers, and sent them to a lab for testing. The analysis confirmed that the stains were human blood, specifically matching that of Marilena. Vito was unable to explain this finding. On September 11, 2017, he was arrested, 40 days after Marilena had disappeared. He was charged with murder and concealing her body. During interrogations, Vito provided confusing and inconsistent accounts that varied from day to day, filled with odd details, but he did not provide any clear confessions or truth. Eventually, he was worn down and agreed to tell investigators where Marilena's body, while still denying that he was the murderer. He claimed he helped the real killer hide her body out of fear for himself and his wife. Vito was compelled to assist in disposing of a body, and he kept the identity of Marilena's killer a secret. On September 12, authorities began excavating his backyard, specifically in a small garden in Garbanyake Milanese. At the exact spot Vito indicated, they found a shallow grave approximately 40 centimeters deep. Inside, they discovered a decapitated body wrapped in multiple layers of polyethylene and placed in a bag, which was partially covered in concrete. The advanced decomposition of the remains and the missing head complicated the identification process. Although the clothing resembled Marilena's, there were no identifying features, like tattoos, scars, or fractures, to confirm her identity. As a result, identification needed to be made using dental records. In the meantime, police continued to search for the missing head. Vito, for unknown reasons, refused to cooperate with law enforcement. His behavior was quite unusual, leading them to suspect he might be feigning mental disorders to claim insanity during the trial and evade punishment for the murder. It was revealed that he had been diagnosed with minor mental health issues in the past and had taken medication, but he had recently stopped. Eventually, under pressure from detectives, Vito started talking again. He claimed that he not only helped hide Marilena's body but also beheaded her after the murder. He said a certain killer had ordered him to do this. The decapitation was a deliberate act to make identification more difficult. Vito stated that he had thrown the head in a dumpster. Given how much time had passed, it was likely that the head had already been taken to a dump outside the city, making it nearly impossible to find. However, the authorities were skeptical. Every claim he made needed to be verified. While interrogating Vito, the police also spoke with his family members. One of them mentioned that Vito owned several plots of land. He recalled seeing Vito heading toward one of the most remote plots the day after Marilena's disappearance. This plot was an abandoned field located between Garbanyake Milanese and the town where Marilena lived. The suspect owned property there but typically did not visit without a valid reason. The family members speculated that Vito might have gone to this isolated area to dispose of Marilena's head. Before beginning their search for the head, the police rechecked Vito's mobile phone. This allowed them to confirm that he had indeed traveled to that location, helping to narrow down the search area. A large search team was organized, which included specially trained dogs. The task was made more difficult by the thick growth of blackberries in most of the area. The team thoroughly searched the abandoned field. A few hundred meters from the road, they found a bag hidden in the bushes. It was the same bag that Marilena usually took with her for errands and shopping. Inside the bag was Marilena's head. On September 26th, the body was finally confirmed to be that of Marilena Ree, a 58-year-old woman who had been missing. However, one question still lingered: what was the motive behind her murder? It is believed that it was likely connected to financial issues. Investigators discovered that in 2014, Marilena had loaned Vito and his wife a significant amount of money, approximately 80,000 euros, from her savings. Vito had persuaded a mutual acquaintance that he and his wife were struggling with the bank due to overdue loans and were at risk of losing their home. Trusting his word, Marilena lent him the money, believing he was honest. In the following years, Vito repeatedly delayed paying back the debt, relying on Marilena's patience and her lack of urgent financial needs. However, Marilena eventually needed the money and requested a quick repayment. When Vito failed to return the funds, she had to take out a bank loan, planning to pay it off as soon as she received her repayment from Vito. Despite her growing insistence on getting her money back, Vito still did not repay the debt. On that significant evening, after her husband went to visit his mother, Marilena likely chose to confront Vito about the money. It is unclear how she ended up in the nearby city. During their discussion, Vito refused to return the money, which prompted a violent reaction from Marilena. This led to a conflict that escalated into a fight. A forensic expert noted that before Marilena was beheaded, she was hit on the head with a blunt object at least 6 times. The specifics are hard to determine due to multiple fractures in her skull and facial bones. Additionally, the remains had deteriorated significantly, complicating the examination further. After the murder, Vito cut off his victim's head, buried the body in a shallow grave near his house, wrapped it in several layers of plastic, and partially covered it with concrete. He had only a small amount of building materials, which was insufficient to fully hide the burial site. He placed the head inside her bag, took it out of town, and threw it deep into the thorny bushes on his remote property, hoping it would never be discovered. Even though the reconstruction of the events was supported by various pieces of evidence, Vito did not confess to the crime. Searches of his house and car found traces of blood and indirect evidence suggesting that he was not alone in committing the crime. Unfortunately, not all details could be uncovered. Vito completely denied any involvement of his wife or anyone else, claiming that a third party was responsible but refusing to identify them. After several interrogations, he ultimately took the blame for the crime. Vito's defense attorney claimed that his confession was coerced, noting that he had been questioned at least 10 times and believed his rights were violated. Initially, he only admitted to hiding the remains but did not confess to murder. However, he later claimed to have killed Marilena. Eventually, his story changed again, and he denied everything. The lawyer suggested that someone else must have committed the crime, indicating the possible involvement of a third party. However, this theory could not be supported by witnesses or the evidence gathered. Without any solid leads on the identity of this mysterious person, the idea was dismissed. All of Vito's inconsistent statements, which raised suspicions among investigators, were attributed to an effort to protect his wife. The next step focused on Vito's mental state. Psychiatric evaluations were performed, which found no significant issues. The prosecution claimed that the concealed body, beheading, and the discarded bag far from the city pointed to premeditated murder, a well-planned crime. It was clear that the defendant had intentionally lured the victim into a trap. However, despite the strong arguments and evidence, Vito cleverly kept altering his story, apparently aiming to confuse the investigation. In a desperate attempt to defend himself, Vito tried to argue that the prosecution was biased against him. His lawyer suggested this was to make him a scapegoat and resolve the case quickly. The accused also mentioned having amnesia, which he said prevented him from remembering the days surrounding Marilena's murder. He ultimately confessed to hearing voices of demons that had tormented him for years, leading him to kill Marilena. However, these claims were disproven through investigations, and multiple witnesses stated they had never seen him exhibit signs of mental illness. Throughout the investigation, Vito remained calm and did not show signs of significant stress, which is uncommon for someone with mental health issues. The only medical condition identified in him was epilepsy, but he experienced seizures very rarely. Even if they happen more frequently, aggressive behavior is not typical for those with epilepsy. Detectives were intrigued by Vito's desperate attempts to shift the focus away from his wife. From the start, she appeared to be a potential accomplice in the murder. Investigators viewed her as more dominant and assertive than Vito, leading them to suspect she might have been the mastermind behind the crime. As they dug deeper, they uncovered more compelling information. Marilena was not the only woman deceived by Vito. He frequently borrowed large amounts of money from relatives, friends, and colleagues, ranging from 30,000 to 100,000 euros, to finance the construction of his house. This project became an obsession for both Vito and his wife, who had long dreamed of building a grand villa. To achieve their goal, they took on significant debts and loans, often borrowing again just to make payments and delay the associated issues of non-payment. By the time Marilena was murdered, they were under immense pressure from creditors. It is likely that everyone who lent them money was in danger, just as Marilena was. Due to the extensive examinations needed for a thorough investigation of the deceased's body, the burial did not take place until 10 months after the body was found. The funeral was held on June 1, 2018. By the end of January 2019, the trial of Vito began. From the start, his inconsistent statements, confessions, and retractions created a sense of distrust. The defense attorney struggled to effectively counter the prosecution's arguments, achieving only limited success in reducing the charges. Initially, it was thought that the murder involved torture, but a forensic expert later confirmed that the severed head and some of the body mutilations occurred after death. On January 24, 2019, Vito, who is 66 years old, was sentenced to life imprisonment. He appealed the verdict, but his appeal was rejected. Investigations into his wife's possible involvement in Marilena's death are still ongoing. On November 21, 2017, Vito was attacked in prison by his cellmate. His cellmate used a metal plate and a makeshift weapon during the assault. Vito reported that he had tried to stop all communication with his cellmate, who had made clear abuse advances that escalated into harassment. When Vito threatened to report his cellmate's behavior, he was attacked. While in prison, Vito continually expressed his dissatisfaction with the justice system, insisting on his innocence and asking for safety from his hostile cellmate. Despite his requests, he was sent back to prison after receiving treatment. On Sunday, November 29, 2020, he was found dead in the prison toilet. In his hand was a note that powerfully criticized the Italian law enforcement. He died after swallowing a garbage bag, which obstructed his airway and led to suffocation. Many suspect that he did not take his own life and that the incident was planned by his cellmate. Anthony J. Dutcher was born on May 22, 1985, in Colorado Springs, USA. He was a dynamic individual with a wide range of interests. He managed to find time for many activities, including studying various musical instruments, languages, and martial arts. He also had a love for nature and enjoyed hiking. Anthony was capable of venturing into the forest alone for a few nights and surviving without assistance. He aspired to combine his passion for languages with his interest in martial arts, dreaming of a future as a translator, serving in the military, or pursuing a related career. Those who knew him described him as friendly, sociable, family-oriented, and ambitious. Anthony always made time for his loved ones, including his grandparents, Carl and Joanna, who lived in the small, close-knit community of Guffey, Colorado, which had a population of about 100 people. In Guffey, everyone knew each other, and the atmosphere was always peaceful and quiet. It was located an hour-and-a-half drive from Colorado Springs. Anthony loved visiting his grandparents because they lived in a peaceful, natural setting where he could explore the outdoors. Their tiny town had only a few dozen houses spread across the Great Plains. His grandfather, Carl Dutcher, was born in 1940. He served in the Army for 20 years before becoming a machinist, and for the last 13 years of his career, he worked in government positions, achieving significant success. His wife, Joanna, was born in 1942, had a diverse career as a cosmetologist, nurse, and store salesperson. Carl and Joanna had known each other since childhood, grew up together from the age of 7, fell in love, and married in 1964. Since then, they have been inseparable. They had 3 sons. After retiring, they moved to Guffey to enjoy their later years peacefully. There, they established a farm, started agricultural activities, and raised animals. Joanna was very sociable and active, while Carl preferred to stay at home and garden. He enjoyed working on their land. When Anthony visited, they purchased a small plot below the farm where Anthony built a hut. This hut was on a hill, offering a beautiful view of the surrounding area, including the family farm. Anthony and his grandfather constructed the hut several years ago. By the time Anthony turned 15, he began visiting more often, much to his grandparents' delight. They shared many interests, which helped them develop a close bond. On New Year's Eve, December 31st, 2000, Anthony was 15 years old. He was going to celebrate the holiday with his grandparents. Since his parents were going out, his grandparents happily agreed to take care of him. The Dutchers dropped Anthony off at his grandparents' house on the morning of December 31st, where preparations for the evening's festivities were already underway. Later, Anthony's friend Isaac Grimes, who was also 15, planned to join them. The boys had been best friends for a long time and were set to go on a holiday camping trip to Anthony's cabin. Shortly before midnight, Anthony's mother called him. They exchanged greetings, both feeling anxious that the phone lines might be busy when midnight struck. They chatted for a while and agreed to reach out to each other on the morning of January 1st, after everyone had woken up. Anthony promised to call as soon as he got up, as he usually wakes up early. However, when his mother woke up in the morning, she did not receive the promised call or even a message, which she found odd. Anthony usually sent a congratulatory message that would arrive at night in case the lines were overloaded, but that didn't arrive either. At first, she didn't worry, thinking it was a night of celebration and rest. She also knew that the boys had planned to go to a remote hut where the connection might be weak. However, when neither the grandparents called nor responded, her concern began to grow. She decided to reach out to her relatives to understand what was happening, but none of them picked up her calls. Anthony's mother, Jennifer, tried multiple times to contact at least one family member, but no one answered until January 3, 2001. At that point, she could no longer dismiss her worries with excuses about camping or the holiday, so she called the police to request a welfare check on her relatives. Law enforcement responded quickly. When they arrived, they discovered a chaotic scene. An exterior examination showed signs of forced entry. Someone had broken into the house through the back door. Inside, everything was in disarray, and many items were damaged. When the patrol arrived at the kitchen, they discovered Carl Dutcher unresponsive on the floor, surrounded by a pool of blood. He had been shot twice in the chest. Concerned that the shooter might still be nearby, the officers drew their service weapons. There was no gun found beside the body, indicating that a crime had likely taken place. As they entered the hallway, they discovered a woman's body on the floor next to a broken toilet in the bathroom. It was Joanna. She was lifeless, lying in a large pool of blood. She had been shot 6 times, making it clear that her death was a murder, not an accident. The family was particularly concerned because Anthony was missing from the house. The police cordoned off the farm and initiated an investigation, focusing on locating Anthony first, as he might need help. Jennifer confirmed that he should have been with his grandparents at that time and couldn't have left for home alone without informing anyone. Anthony was declared missing, and a search was launched. The Dutcher family was devastated by the events and chose to travel to Guffey to help search for Anthony. Jennifer informed the police that her son planned to spend the night at a cabin in the forest, but she couldn't explain its exact location over the phone. The forensic still experts continued to investigate the site of the attack. It appeared to be a sudden and unprovoked assault. Carl seemed to have walked into the kitchen and was shot without any warning. He didn't have time to defend himself and showed no signs of struggle. Joanna, on the other hand, might have had slightly more time to react. The assailants attacked her, forcefully hitting her head against the edge of the toilet before shooting her. She likely tried to protect herself, as one of her hands was shot through. The bullet struck her head after entering through her palm, leading to her immediate death. She was presumably the second victim of the attackers and may have attempted to escape to the bathroom for safety, but it was futile. Members of the Dutcher family who arrived in Guffey, they reported that Carl had a strong interest in firearms. He owned a variety of guns, including different models of pistols and rifles, which he restored and sold as a hobby. At the time of the crime, there were several dozen firearms in his house. It was crucial to determine what might have been stolen. The son of Carl, Charles, assisted in this investigation, he sharing his father's passion for guns and having a rough idea of what was in their collection. This was an important lead, as the firearms were not stored openly but rather in a locked gun cabinet. For someone to find, open, and steal a gun, they would need to act with intention, suggesting that the criminal was familiar with both the victims and the location of the gun cabinet. Detectives started to entertain the theory that Anthony, the missing grandson, might be the killer. They were unsure about his fate. It was theorized that he could have taken a weapon and harmed his family before fleeing. However, Anthony's parents firmly rejected this idea. They emphasized that he loved his grandparents deeply and had great relationships with all his relatives. Furthermore, he did not have any mental health issues and had never run away. Overall, there were no known problems with him. Anthony's parents guided the police to the campsite in the woods where Anthony intended to spend the holiday with his best friend Isaac Grimes, in a cabin. Jennifer was hopeful of finding her son alive, believing he might be hiding there to escape any danger. The campsite was located about 500 meters from their home, situated on a hill obscured by thick vegetation. Several armed police officers, along with her, made their way to the site. When the police entered the scene, they quickly spotted a sleeping bag with someone inside and another empty bag nearby. There were also board games scattered around, suggesting they had started playing. Unfortunately, Jennifer's hopes were shattered. Anthony was present, but tragically, he had been murdered. His throat was deeply slit, nearly decapitating him. The attack was brutal, leaving him without a chance to defend himself. It appeared he was caught off guard and killed in cold blood, and the single, powerful blow indicated that the killer was experienced. Detectives found this particularly troubling. The precision and force suggested it was not the killer's first murder. Despite their efforts, the police could not locate the weapon used in the stabbing. The parents were thoroughly interviewed, sharing everything they knew about Anthony's belongings. It seemed the attacker had taken some valuables, which could assist in the investigation. Notably missing was a watch given to Anthony by his grandparents for the holiday. It was a significant, adorned with a blue flame design. On that day, another 15-year-old boy, named Isaac Grimes, had been at the campsite. This accounted for an extra sleeping bag and game set up in Anthony's cabin. It was clear that at least 2 people were present, but the other sleeping bag was empty. The police were now looking for another potential victim. They first decided to visit Isaac's home since he lived nearby. To their surprise, they found him there. 15-year-old Isaac Grimes opened the door calmly. He was alive and seemed unharmed. Isaac explained to investigators that he had initially planned to go to his relatives with Anthony on New Year's Eve to set up a tent camp. However, at the last minute, he decided to cancel his plans with Anthony because other friends invited him to a party in Colorado Springs. The party was organized by high school students, and Isaac chose to attend. He stated that he never reached the Dutcher's house, had not seen his best friend, and was unaware of what happened to him. Isaac was deeply saddened by the news of Anthony and his grandparents' deaths, but there was something troubling about how he was acting. Unfortunately, Anthony's mother wasn't certain if Isaac had visited Anthony that evening. They hadn't talked about it during her conversation with her son, but she did know that Isaac had been to the cabin with Anthony earlier. Anthony had taken him to his secret spot, which was meant to be kept private from everyone else. The detectives decided to confirm Isaac's statement by finding out who he attended the party with that night. Reluctantly, he provided the names of two classmates, Jonathan Matheny, who is 17, and Glenn Urban, who is 18. The police reached out to both boys, and while they were willing to talk, their accounts were surprisingly similar. It seemed as if they had rehearsed their stories, using the same phrases and wording, which is unusual during interrogations. However, this similarity alone was not sufficient to charge them. The police needed evidence linking them to the crime scene. Regardless, Jonathan and Glenn, along with Anthony's best friend, Isaac, remained under suspicion. It was unclear whose sleeping bag was found next to Anthony's body in his cabin. Following this, the autopsy report was released, showing that all the victims, Carl, Joanna, and Anthony, had died on New Year's Eve. This strongly suggested that the killer had targeted the family specifically, as he knew where to find each of them. The attacker must have been familiar with the Dutcher family, since very few people knew about Anthony's secret cabin or Grandpa's gun cabinet. This theory was further supported by the fact that Carl's house had weapons. He had a habit of always carrying a gun with him before opening the door and typically kept it near the entrance. For an American living in a remote area, having a gun can be crucial for self-defense. This practice was so common that the grandfather would even greet his children and grandchildren while holding a gun. However, Carl unprepared when the attack occurred. The assailant or assailants were careful and left no evidence in the house. It was believed that Anthony was the first victim and was likely killed by a single attacker. The house assault might have been carried out by another individual, as suggested by the different behavior, style, and weapon used in the attack. Nonetheless, these theories could not be confirmed. The investigation lasted for 2 months. No useful evidence had been discovered. Then, on March 6, 2001, Isaac came to the police station, terrified for his life. He shared a bizarre story about being chased by a man with a shotgun who had killed his best friend's family. Initially, this seemed like paranoia, possibly the result of the boy being deeply affected by the recent murders of 3 people. However, given this new information, the detectives began to suspect something more and decided to re-examine the events from New Year's Eve. One of the investigators recalled the watch mentioned by Anthonia's parents. When they met with Isaac, they asked him about it. He claimed he had seen the watch on his friend, which was the biggest contradiction in the investigation. The watch had only been given on New Year's Eve, so Isaac couldn't have seen it unless their meeting occurred just before midnight. This conflicted with Isaac's earlier statements. It became evident that Isaac had been in the house and knew more than he let on. It appeared that the investigation was making progress. On March 8, 2001, Isaac Grimes and his parents were called in for an official questioning. He maintained that he had not been at his friend's house on the night of the incident. The police then shifted their focus to the watch, effectively exposing Isaac's lies in front of his family. This investigation led to the discovery of an army jacket with blood stains in the victim's house. Eventually, Isaac succumbed to the pressure of his conflicting statements and confessed. Isaac shared the truth about what occurred on New Year's Eve. He explained that just before midnight, his classmate Jonathan Matheny brought he over to Anthony's house. The boys greeted each other, exchanged holiday wishes, and then went to a campsite together. There, they spent time as friends, played games, and shared stories. Anthony was unaware that his best friend had hidden a knife. As they were about to go to bed, Isaac distracted Anthony by pointing out a light in the window. When Anthony looked away, Isaac approached him from behind, drew a knife, and stabbed Anthony in the throat with great force, resulting in a fatal injury. The medical examiner was later shocked to discover that a 15-year-old boy could inflict such a deep wound with a single strike. Isaac acknowledged that he had applied all his strength in the attack. Jonathan Matheny arrived at the Dutcher farm around 4 a.m. with a rifle. He waited at a distance for Isaac to return, and then they both entered the house to confront the elderly couple, breaking down the back door. The noise disturbed the homeowners. Joanna and Carl got up, and Carl went to the kitchen to see what had happened, likely intending to scare off the intruders, unaware they were there to kill them. Jonathan shot Carl first while Isaac just watched. Carl fell to the ground after a couple of shots. Terrified, Joanna fled to the bathroom and locked the door, hoping to hide, but Jonathan had no intention of leaving any witnesses. He forced open the bathroom door, struck Joanna's head against the toilet, and then shot her. It's important to note that both perpetrators were still in school. Jonathan was 17 and Isaac was only 15. Isaac later stated that he simply followed his older friend and watched as he committed these crimes. The criminals knew about the weapons Carl owned and took several with them. They loaded the weapons into a car trunk and drove to the house of Glenn Urban, 18-year-old. They gave him a knife and a rifle that had been used to attack two people, instructing him to get rid of the weapons, making him an accomplice. The police could not determine the motive behind the crime, and Isaac refused to speak. The source of the rifle was also unknown. 17-year-old Jonathan Matheny was arrested right after he confessed, but he claimed he was not involved in the triple murder. Then Glenn Urban was taken into custody. He initially denied any involvement but eventually confessed. Glenn revealed that he had been instructed to dispose of the weapons and provided important information. He alleged that another teenager, Simon Sue, who was 18 at the time, played a key role in the crime. Glenn stated that Simon was the one who planned the massacre, chose the targets, directed the operation, and devised a way to cover up the evidence. At Simon's urging, Glenn was instructed to destroy the weapon. He took it apart and disposed of the pieces in various locations. During the investigation, the detectives learned about Simon for the first time and decided to question the other two people involved in the crime. However, those still individuals refused to speak. It was revealed that Simon had a lonely and unloved childhood, with very little social interaction during his school years. He met Isaac, Glenn, and Jonathan while in high school. Isaac and Simon became friends through their shared interests in chess and video games. All three of them were socially awkward and had few friends, wishing desperately to be more popular. Over time, Simon gained influence over the group, promising them a more exciting life. He claimed to be part of a secret organization and said he had connections with a rebel army in Guyana. This behavior was similar to recruitment methods used to attract socially isolated schoolchildren who want to belong to something bigger. It soon became clear that Simon had deceived them all. When they became part of this organization, they underwent intense training that included using firearms and throat-cutting techniques. Simon assigned progressively tougher and more brutal tasks. It got to the point where he compelled them to eat and drink to the point of exhaustion, referring to this torment as a test of their willpower. In the end, he manipulated the teenagers so thoroughly that they couldn't picture their lives outside of this organization in completing Simon's demands. Simon ran the club like a military unit, assigning each member a military rank to inspire them to serve him better. He forced the boys to give him a portion of their money and punished them harshly for disobedience. One of the ongoing activities was watching disturbing videos of real animal and human killings. When Isaac voiced his concerns and showed signs that he felt something was wrong, Simon labeled him a traitor. He threatened Isaac with violence and demanded that he prove his loyalty to the group, all while being pressured by two older boys. Isaac was given the task of killing his best friend, Anthony, to prove his loyalty to the team. Jonathan was tasked with getting rid of Anthony's grandparents. Both were supposed to retrieve several weapons from Carl's house. Since they lived nearby, they were aware of his interest in weapon restoration and knew about his gun cabinet. It was not difficult to find out the location thanks to Anthony. But why was the Dutcher family chosen as the victims? The motive for the triple murder of these individuals remained a mystery. According to sources, Carl may have made some unpleasant remark about Simon, which could have provoked hatred. However, there was no confirmation of this. All the students claimed that Simon set them against Carl because the real motive might have been the presence of firearms, which Simon wanted to acquire. When the police raided Simon Sue's house with a warrant, they quickly found evidence that corroborated what the other teenagers had said. Specifically, they discovered several items stolen from Carl. It appeared that real preparations for another crime were underway. The manipulator was found to have several dozen firearms, all of which had been stolen during various assaults. However, prior to the tragedy at Carl Farm, these assaults had not been violent. There were at least 30 pistols and rifles in the house, which now needed to be examined. Despite being 18 years old, the leader of the gang had his own warehouse, containing even more weapons, spare parts in various stages of disassembly, and ammunition. There was a whole arsenal stored there, including an AK-47. According to the police, it could arm a small infantry unit. Simon was taken in for questioning. Despite being a quiet and unloved young man, he turned out to be very cunning and cynical. He refused to admit guilt, claiming that Glenn, Isaac, and Jonathan were the real criminals who wanted to make him the scapegoat. According to Simon, he was in Canada at the time of the attack and had nothing to do with what happened. Of course, the leader of the gang lied. He denied forcing his friends to engage in various extreme activities and described the club they allegedly belonged to as merely an entertainment community. He immediately began to proclaim that all three accomplices had mental and behavioral issues, labeling all of them as aggressive. It was clear he had prepared extensively in case he was caught. Ultimately, it was decided to try all the criminals as adults for the triple murder. Isaac Grimes pleaded guilty to the murder of Anthony Dutcher, his best friend. He was sentenced to 60 years in prison. Jonathan Matheny and Simon Sue were charged with organizing criminal activity, planning murder, and the legal possession of weapons. Jonathan Matheny was also charged with double murder. In the end, Jonathan sentenced to 68 years in prison, while the ringleader, Simon Sue, was sentenced to 53 years in prison. For aiding the criminal group and disposing of the instrument of the crime, Glenn Urban was sentenced to only 2 years in prison. It was proven that he did not plan or commit the crime, though he was fully aware of his friend's plans and did not help prevent the atrocities. Isaac's mother still cannot believe that her son committed such a horrific crime. She struggles to understand how her sweet, kind son, Isaac, turned into a real monster under the influence of a dangerous manipulator. Isaac himself explains his participation in the murder by stating that he was intimidated and threatened. He was warned that if he did not obey and fulfill his role, his family would be killed, which left him feeling forced to stab his best friend. After beginning his sentence, Isaac wrote a letter in which he expressed remorse for the crime he had committed. Some of Anthony's relatives do not believe Isaac's story about intimidation and think that he could have gone to the police, which could have prevented anyone from being harmed, neither his family nor the Dutcher family. Dutcher family feel that the sentences given are too light. They believe Simon and Jonathan should receive the death penalty for the brutal killings of innocent people. Anthony's mother expressed forgiveness towards Isaac and even testified on his behalf during the trial to help lessen his sentence. She thinks that Isaac was manipulated by Simon. After her son's death, she was so heartbroken that she attempted to end her life twice. Despite this, she continues to write letters to Isaac and feels compassion for him. The tragic end of the Dutcher family story is a heartbreaking reminder of human complexity and the consequences of psychological manipulation. The case not only claimed the lives of Anthony, Carl, and Joanna, but it also left deep wounds in the hearts of the family and the community. Although justice was served through the convictions of Isaac, Jonathan, Simon, and Glenn, the Dutcher family's loss remains irreparable. Jennifer's act of forgiveness toward Isaac reflects love and compassion while also raising questions about personal responsibility and the effects of manipulation. Now more than ever, this story draws attention to the need to protect young people from negative influences and reminds us of the value of family and community engagement in preventing similar tragedies.
Betrayal in relationships is not a legal crime, but it is a conscious act that harms someone who has trusted you deeply. This betrayal can lead to significant emotional pain and can sometimes escalate into situations that involve actual crimes. The story of Kathy Cho was unusual from the start. Investigators first thought she might have run away from her strict parents, been kidnapped by one of her many online followers, or taken an impulsive trip with someone without informing anyone. There were even rumors suggesting that her parents could be involved in her disappearance. Sadly, Kathy was never seen alive again. For over a year, the investigation went nowhere until unexpected clues emerged from an unlikely source. Shockingly, the culprit had been hiding in plain sight the entire time and even managed to pass a lie detector test. Kathy's parents came from a small province in Taiwan. In 1989, they moved to the United States in search of a better life and settled in Renton, Washington, which is close to Seattle. At that time, they spoke very little English, which made it hard for them to adjust to their new surroundings. They led a private and isolated life, seldom interacting with neighbors or the local community. On November 29, 1990, they had their only child, a daughter named Kathy Chow. Unlike her parents, who found it challenging to connect with others, Kathy was a cheerful, outgoing, and lively young woman. She had a natural ability to make friends, but her upbringing was strict, influenced by her parents' cultural values and traditions. Kathy was not allowed to invite friends over and had to report where she was, with whom at all times. As she got older, the restrictive environment at home became more challenging for her. Even though Kathy followed her parents' rules, she often felt constrained and isolated. In high school, she set up multiple profiles on social media, where she openly shared information about herself, her interests, her experiences. These platforms allowed her to connect with others and escape some of her parents' limitations. She even developed a modest following online, which helped her deal with the lack of freedom in her everyday life. As Kathy started dating and expressing interest in boys, her father's disapproval became more intense. Her father criticized every young man she interacted with, as he strongly disapproved of the relaxed and independent lifestyles of American teenagers. He was convinced that his daughter should marry someone from Taiwan rather than a local man. He frequently shared his growing disappointment with life in America with his wife, expressing regrets about immigrating and often mentioning his wish to return to their homeland. In the fall of 2009, 18-year-old Kathy Cho was in her senior year of high school when she started dating Ezekiel James Watkins, who was 2.5 years older than her. They had known each other since their teenage years. As Ezekiel also attended Renton High School, their relationship lasted only a couple of months, and during that time, Ezekiel never visited Kathy's home. Instead, they met in neutral locations or spent time at Ezekiel's apartment, which he shared with a friend. This was because Kathy's father, Mr. Chu, strongly disapproved of Ezekiel due to his unconventional appearance and bold behavior. Ezekiel was a musician and a popular figure, known for frequently changing girlfriends. Kathy was thrilled when he showed interest in her and was so determined to continue seeing him that she sometimes lied to her father and defied her parents' wishes to sneak out for dates with Ezekiel. After the new year, Kathy's relationship with Ezekiel ended just as quickly as it had begun. Ezekiel lost interest in her and soon started dating other young women, one of whom was Kathy's classmates. This situation deeply hurt Kathy. Whether it was intentional or not, she had truly loved Ezekiel. He was her first serious boyfriend. Their relationship felt special and full of promise. Kathy was determined to win him back. Initially, those close to Kathy and Ezekiel believed they had separated amicably and remained friends. Kathy soon began dating other young men, probably to demonstrate to herself, others, and especially Ezekiel, that she was still attractive. Unfortunately, this unconventional method, combined with her frantic efforts to rekindle her relationship with Ezekiel, ultimately resulted in a tragedy. On April 19, 2010, Kathy's parents reported their daughter missing to the local police. The night before, Kathy had gone out with friends, taking only her phone, and failed to come home. Her parents expected her back by 8:30 p.m., but when she didn't return, her father called her. Kathy ignored her father's calls, which only added to their worries. At 9:30 p.m., they received a message from Kathy. She said she was having coffee with a friend at Westfield South Center Mall and would be home a bit late. Although this made her father frustrated, he and her mother waited patiently for her return. However, when midnight passed and Kathy still hadn't come home and her phone was turned off, her parents became increasingly worried. They started calling Kathy's friends, but none of them had seen her that night. Concerned, her parents decided to go to the shopping mall themselves. By the time they arrived, Westfield's South Center Mall was closed, except for the movie theater and a few cafes, but there was no sign of Kathy. The tension in the Chow household was rising, but her parents still hoped their daughter, Kathy, had just stayed out too late and would come home soon. By morning, when they hadn't heard from her, they decided to go to the police station to report her missing. Kathy's absence from school that day worried her teachers and classmates, as she was a responsible student who never skipped classes without a good reason. This led her parents to suspect that she might have lied to them and gone on a date. The big question was, who was she with? This was something the police would need to investigate. The investigators approached her disappearance with great urgency right from the start. They quickly began searching for her, interviewing her friends and acquaintances to gather any potential leads. Unfortunately, their initial efforts didn't yield any useful information. Detectives contacted Kathy's cell phone provider and found that her phone last connected to a network at 9:30 p.m. from a local park next to a large, marshy area. This discovery raised serious concerns. Kathy had not been at the mall as she had said. Instead, she had been in the park, where she sent her last message to her father before turning off her phone, which has remained off since then. Detectives decided to start their investigation by interviewing Kathy's ex-boyfriend, Ezekiel Watkins. When he was brought in for questioning, he appeared noticeably anxious and genuinely concerned about Kathy's disappearance. Ezekiel explained that he and Kathy had broken up around 3 months ago, but had continued to be friends. He mentioned that they had both moved on and were dating other people, so there were no hard feelings between them. He also suggested that Kathy might have been dating multiple people simultaneously, although he admitted he didn't know the names of any of her new romantic interests. When asked about his activities on the night his ex-girlfriend, Kathy Cho, went missing, Ezekiel stated that he was at home with his roommate, John Carpenter. They lived together and spent the evening playing video games until about 3 a.m., after which they went to sleep. John Neighbor, who was also acquainted with Kathy from school, confirmed Ezekiel's alibi and was willing to assist the police with their investigation. Ezekiel acknowledged that Kathy had sent him a message earlier in the evening, asking to meet. However, he turned her down, claiming he was busy because he wasn't interested in going out. He revealed that Kathy frequently tried to reach out to him, and he believed she wanted to talk about their past relationship. To avoid that conversation, he chose to make an excuse. Ezekiel's story initially appeared credible, but investigators were hesitant to rule him out as a suspect. His alibi was only supported by his roommate, prompting detectives to request that Ezekiel take a polygraph test. After some hesitation, he consented. The test results generally supported his version of events, though a few of his answers were somewhat ambiguous. Investigators considered these discrepancies to be minor and within the normal margin of error. In the end, they concluded that Ezekiel was unlikely to be connected to Kathy's disappearance and allowed him to leave after the questioning. However, questions remained about what Kathy's parents might be concealing. Kathy's friends noted that she was very active on social media and dating websites, where she often met new people. Recently, she had been on dates with several young men, yet no one seemed to know who these individuals were. Investigators believed that many answers to their questions could be found on Kathy's laptop, which included her accounts and private messages. However, they faced a major obstacle when Kathy's parents refused to allow them to enter the house, search her room, or take any of her personal items. This behavior raised suspicions among the investigators, who felt the parents might be hiding something. The police attempted to explain to Mr. and Mrs. Kanchu that Kathy's laptop could hold important clues, possibly even the identity of someone who could have harmed her or been involved in her disappearance. To find this information, specialists needed access to her online accounts. Despite this, her parents were uncooperative. They insisted on taking the laptop to a programmer they knew, claiming they would first review the contents themselves before handing everything over to the police. On April 21st, investigators called Kathy's parents in for questioning and recommended that they take a polygraph test. Kathy's mother immediately became upset and said she couldn't go through with it. Kathy's father, though hesitant, agreed to the test but appeared very anxious. During the test, he had intense emotional responses, often crying as he answered questions. Ultimately, he did not pass the polygraph, which heightened the suspicions about her parents. Detectives were eager to find the truth, so they interviewed the neighbors of the Chows, and their insights were interesting. The neighbors reported that Chus had moved into the house in 1989 after immigrating to the United States, but over the 20 years since, they had not formed any close relationships. The Cho family was known for being reclusive. They rarely socialized, never invited anyone to their home, avoided visiting others. Even Kathy's friends had never been allowed inside. The Chus were not considered rude. They simply preferred to maintain their privacy. They were very protective of Kathy's reputation and were cautious about her friends and social activities. This concern, investigators believed, explained their reluctance to hand over the laptop. They wanted to understand what their daughter had been involved in first. The reason they failed the polygraph test was quite straightforward. She had been missing for 3 days, so her parents were extremely emotional, filled with worry, fear, and grief. The investigator realized that their mental and emotional state would likely affect their ability to pass the test. A few days later, Kathy's father came back to the police station on his own with Kathy's laptop. This time, he agreed to take another polygraph test, and the results indicated that he was telling the truth, clearing him of any involvement in his daughter's disappearance. Kathy's parents were worried about her admirers, fearing that her laptop might contain private photos or videos that could damage her reputation. They wanted to keep everything private. Fortunately, nothing concerning was found. However, investigators learned that Kathy had been chatting online with 8 different young men and had gone on at least a couple of dates with each of them. Kathy enjoyed the attention from these young men and often bragged about it to her friends, leading some to speculate that she might have been trying to make Ezekiel jealous. Regardless of her reasons, the police had to investigate all of these young men for any connection to Kathy's disappearance. Thanks to her message history, the police were able to gather their names, phone numbers, and the dates and locations of Kathy's meetings with them. In the following days, detectives successfully located all 8 individuals and brought them in for questioning. The youngest was 17 and the oldest was 24. Kathy had met each of them online, and they did not know one another prior to this. She had reached out to them and arranged the meetings, but it was evident that she had not formed a serious relationship with any of them. However, investigators were considering whether one of them might have developed intense feelings for Kathy, potentially leading to possessiveness or jealousy. 5 of the young men provided strong, confirmed alibis for the night Kathy went missing. 2 were out of town. 1 was working an overnight shift. Another was in the hospital recovering from a car accident, and 1 spent the entire night at a bar with friends, which was verified by security camera footage. The last 3, who lacked solid alibis, voluntarily took polygraph tests and were cleared of any suspicion regarding Kathy's disappearance, leading the investigation to a standstill. For several weeks, search teams thoroughly explored the marshy area behind the park where Kathy's phone signal was last detected. Despite their extensive efforts, they found no evidence of her. Investigators also struggled to find witnesses who might have seen Kathy in the park that evening. Flyers featuring Kathy's photo were distributed across the city, and social media groups were created where friends and acquaintances exchanged information, theories about her disappearance. News outlets covered the case, urging anyone with relevant information to come forward. The police received hundreds of tips from people claiming to have seen Kathy the night she disappeared or later in various parts of the city. Unfortunately, every lead turned out to be a false alarm, as these sightings involved different young women who resembled her, often of Asian descent. The investigation quickly hit a dead end, with no new evidence, leads, or witnesses to pursue, and progress came to a standstill. By this time, most people believed that Kathy was no longer alive. However, the questions about what happened to her and who was responsible still existed. There was a lingering fear that a dangerous individual remained at large, posing a potential threat to others. In the summer of 2011, police received a call from Giovanni Candelario, who claimed to have crucial information about Kathy's disappearance. Giovanni was a friend of John Carpenter, the roommate of Ezekiel Watkins. He had been temporarily living in their apartment since April of the previous year due to a fight with his girlfriend, but he had not been mentioned in the investigation and had never been questioned by the police. Giovanni stated that he knew Kathy through mutual friends, although they were not very close. He informed the police that on the night Kathy disappeared, April 18, 2010, Ezekiel did not come home at 8 p.m., as he had previously said. Instead, Giovanni remembered Ezekiel arriving closer to midnight and asked to borrow a shovel to bury a duck. At that time, Giovanni was playing a video game but noticed that Ezekiel was covered in mud. When Giovanni inquired about it, Ezekiel explained that he had been riding his bike off-road, fell into a puddle, and got dirty. Shortly after this, Ezekiel asked John Carpenter to go outside with him. Giovanni wasn't sure how long they were gone because he had fallen asleep. When detectives questioned Giovanni about why he hadn't come forward earlier, he explained that he hadn't considered the detail important at the time. Since Ezekiel was quickly cleared as a suspect, Giovanni also was never prompted to give a statement. Candelario said he did not suspect anything at the time. However, in the following months, he noticed a significant change in Watkins's demeanor and began to question the incident. Initially, investigators doubted Giovanni's story. They thought he might have had a conflict with Ezekiel and was seeking revenge. However, they needed to confirm his claims, so detectives brought John Carpenter in for further questioning. A startling confession emerged. At first, Carpenter maintained the same story he had told a year ago, but when detectives presented him with Giovanni's testimony, his attitude noticeably shifted. He paused and questioned, "What kind of sentence will I get for concealing a crime? Is there a way to lessen it if I cooperate?" Understanding the seriousness of his predicament, Carpenter made a deal with the police. In return for a lighter sentence, he promised to provide all the information he had and to disclose the location of Kathy's remains. Carpenter tried hard to downplay his involvement in the events, maintaining that he never intended to lie to the investigators. He explained that he chose to stay silent out of fear that Ezekiel might hurt him as well. Carpenter stated that Ezekiel came home around midnight that night, covered in mud. He also remembered noticing a recent cut near Ezekiel's ear, which had been overlooked during the investigation because Ezekiel had a beard back then. Ezekiel Watkins confided in his roommate, John Carpenter, about a shocking incident that could change everything. He asked John for help and requested a small shovel from the trunk of his car. The two then made their way to a marshy area behind the park, walking through about 50 yards of thick underbrush. They stopped near the body of Katie Chu. Ezekiel explained that her death was accidental and that he was only acting in self-defense. He pleaded with John to help him conceal the body. Together, they dragged Katie's body further into the dense thicket, covering several more yards until it became nearly impossible to move. There, they dug a shallow grave, placed her inside, and covered her with dirt, branches. Even a year later, John could show investigators the exact burial location by using a large fallen tree as a reference point. Ezekiel was arrested the same day, but firmly maintained that he did not commit a crime, claiming it was an accident. He acknowledged that he had agreed to meet Kathy after she texted him, but he stated that she was aggressive and confrontational during their encounter. Ezekiel mentioned that Kathy was still trying to resolve their differences and had expressed this to him. To keep a low profile, Ezekiel suggested they walk to a nearby marshy area to talk. However, the argument intensified once they arrived. Ezekiel said that Kathy's behavior became even more intense. At one point, he took out a knife he always carried, claiming he did not intend to harm her, but wanted to frighten her enough to leave him alone so he could go. When Kathy saw the knife, she allegedly rushed at him and hit his arm, resulting in him accidentally cutting himself. A struggle followed. Ezekiel claimed He didn't know how the knife ended up in Kathy's neck. When he realized she was no longer breathing, he panicked. Instead of calling for help, he went home and asked John for help without fully explaining the situation. Although shocked, John agreed to help him hide the body. Together, they created a false story and stuck to it. Giovanni Candelario was staying in their apartment without anyone's knowledge, so he was not questioned by the police during the early investigation. When Kathy's body was found in a shallow grave, it was in such an advanced state of decomposition that DNA testing was necessary to confirm her identity. However, the forensic evidence contradicted Ezekiel's account of what happened. The medical examiner found more than a dozen knife wounds on Kathy, including a fatal cut to her throat, which was likely the cause of her death. This was clearly not an accident. It was a brutal and deliberate act. Despite the substantial evidence against him, Ezekiel maintained his innocence, claiming it was self-defense and that Kathy was accidentally hurt during their struggle. Investigators also discovered that the last message sent from Kathy's phone to her father was actually written and sent by Ezekiel, indicating he was trying to delay the discovery of her disappearance. During the trial, Ezekiel admitted that Kathy had been stalking him and trying to interfere with his new relationship. However, he denied that he had meant to hurt her. Giovanni, who provided important information, was not charged and remained a witness in the case. John Carpenter, who was Ezekiel's roommate and agreed to help investigators, received a suspended sentence for hiding evidence and lying in his testimony. Ezekiel Watkins pleaded not guilty to first-degree murder. However, Watkins was eventually convicted and sentenced to 27 years in prison. As a result, without the possibility of parole, Watkins remains incarcerated at the Washington Correctional Center in Shelton, Washington. Kathy Cho's life, radiant and full of promise, was stolen in 2010 by the one she once trusted, Ezekiel Watkins. His betrayal, a knife through her heart and her family's, left Renton, Washington, reeling for her Taiwanese immigrant parents, who cradled dreams of a better life. Kathy's loss was a wound deepened by their silent isolation. Her social media posts, a cry for freedom, led investigators to her killer but revealed the perils of her digital world. Renton's community, united in grief, lit candles at vigils and plastered her smile on flyers, refusing to let her fade. Giovanni Candelario's courage unveiled the truth, securing Ezekiel's 27-year sentence. Kathy's spirit endures in Renton High's quiet memorials and new safety lessons, whispering to us all, cherish those who shine, guard their trust, and hold fast to hope in the face of heartbreak. On a cold December night in 2011, 13-year-old Erica Lynn Parsons vanished without a trace. Her parents claimed she had gone to live with her biological grandmother, but their story raised suspicions. As investigators began to dig deeper, unsettling details emerged: stories of bruises, unexplained absences, and a plastic tote that became impossible to overlook. What truly happened to Erica, and why did it take years for the truth to be revealed? This is a tragic story of a girl who was silenced, but whose story would not remain hidden. Erica Lynn Parsons was born on February 24, 1998, Carolyn Parsons' child. Carolyn separated from her husband, Steve, who was not the biological father, before Erica was born. Despite her small size, Erica was a lively baby. However, just days after her birth, Carolyn had to make a difficult decision due to financial struggles. She chose to put Erica up for adoption to give her daughter a better future. Although Erica's biological father was not in the picture, Carolyn's former brother-in-law and sister-in-law, Sandy and Casey Parsons, chose to adopt Erica. Erica became part of the Parsons family when she joined them at just 4 weeks old. Although the adoption was officially completed in 2000, Sandy later suggested that it actually took place in July instead of March. Casey Parsons happily remembered those early days, saying they had her from the time she was 4 weeks old. By the time the adoption was finalized, she was already calling them Mama and Daddy. They were the only parents she had known. Sandy and Casey had a tumultuous relationship. They got married in the early 1990s and had 3 children. However, their marriage was marred by incidents of domestic violence. Sandy was convicted of assaulting Casey in 1994 and 1997, leading to court-ordered probation and community service. Despite these challenges, they stayed together and welcomed another child, Erica, into their family. Concerns about Erica's safety arose in 2002 when social services started investigating allegations of abuse in the Parsons home, dating back to when Erica was only 2 years old. These allegations raised significant worries about how the family treated their adopted daughter. The Department of Social Services initiated an investigation into claims that Erica had been physically abused. Reports indicated that Casey Parsons often used a belt to discipline Erica, which resulted in visible bruises. Observers noted marks on Erica's buttocks, the back of her legs, and the side of her face. It was also reported that Erica sometimes refused to eat, and that Casey had told her she was not loved. During the interview with the Department of Social Services, Casey denied the claims of abuse. The investigator noticed that Erica seemed comfortable around her parents, sitting on their laps without any signs of fear. However, it was noted that Erica was quite small for her age, weighing only 41 pounds at 4 years old. To ensure Erica's safety, a safety plan was put in place. Casey and Sandy Parsons agreed to use non-physical methods of discipline, including timeouts and grounding, committed to providing a safe and stable home for Erica. On March 1, 2003, Casey went to Mexico for a medical procedure to reverse her tubal ligation. Later that year, in August, Erica started attending Boston Elementary School. The staff remembered her as a shy but kind girl who smiled frequently and had a fondness for stickers. One teacher noted that Erica would push her bangs out of her face when she felt nervous and would shine with pride when she received compliments. In January 2004, Casey announced online that she was pregnant, expecting a child in September. Around this time, the Department of Social Services received a complaint about the Parsons family, which prompted officials to visit their home. The complaint alleged that Erica was weak and that Casey no longer wanted her, asserting that the parents had attempted to give her away. Casey and Sandy denied using physical punishment, stating they raised their voices instead of hitting their children. They also explained that Erica suffered from gastrointestinal issues, causing her to vomit food she didn't like, and denied any threats to withhold food or give her away. When the Department of Social Services interviewed Erica in private, she described discipline as timeouts or loss of privileges and mentioned that she might get spanked for very serious misbehavior, although Erica seemed happy and well-connected with her adoptive parents. Investigators noted her small size and frailty. The Department of Social Services required the Parsons to seek medical care for Erica if her eating issues continued or if her development fell behind. Nonetheless, evidence of neglect was found, as Erica was not receiving necessary medical treatment. She was then placed with her aunt, who noticed that Erica was wearing toddler-sized clothes and was severely underweight. While living with her aunt, Erica began eating regularly, playing, and gaining weight. She also revealed that Casey and Sandy had physically disciplined her. However, the aunt did not pursue legal custody. After 8 months, Casey and Sandy regained custody of Erica. In 2004, Erica moved to a different elementary school. On August 20th of that year, Casey gave birth to a daughter. By 2005, Casey was pregnant again, but unfortunately experienced an early miscarriage. She then started a business. Some reports describe this business as a Chihuahua puppy mill, although specific details were limited. Later that year, Erica was homeschooled through a program created by Casey at their home. Casey was the chief administrator, and the state did not require background checks or detailed progress reports for the school. Records indicate that the program enrolled 3 girls and 1 boy, but there were no annual achievement test scores submitted from 2005 onwards. After this, information about Erica became difficult to find. On July 30th, 2013, Erica's 19-year-old brother, Jamie Parsons, argued with their parents and reported Erica missing. Jamie testified that the last time he saw Erica was on November 19, 2011. She was standing in a corner, which was a common punishment Erica endured. She didn't look well. She looked like a zombie, he said. She said she didn't feel well. She said she couldn't breathe. Casey Parsons heard this and told her to shut up. When he woke up the next morning, his parents had left early, which was unusual, and Erica was gone. His parents returned home without Erica, and he sensed something was wrong. Jamie felt this explanation was strange, especially since his father, Sandy, appeared very upset when talking about Erica's absence. He recalled his father looking extremely pale and anxious. When he asked his parents where she was, they claimed they had taken her to Asheville, North Carolina, to stay with her biological grandmother, who supposedly reached out on Facebook to reconnect with her. Jamie told the authorities that this was the last he had heard about Erica. An investigation into Erica's disappearance began immediately. Detectives conducted a thorough search of the Parsons home, lifting floorboards, examining the yard for possible hidden graves, and following every lead available. Despite their hard work, Erica's location remained unknown. They received countless tips and reports, including supposed sightings of her on the roadside and calls from psychics, but none provided any solid answers. The FBI got involved, offering rewards and drawing national attention to the case. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children created an age progression photo to show what Erica might look like at 15 based on her appearance at age 9. These images were widely distributed on billboards in hopes of generating new information. Authorities were committed to finding Erica. Casey and Sandy told investigators that the last time they saw Erica was in December 2011 at a McDonald's in Mooresville, North Carolina. They claimed they took Erica to meet her biological grandmother, Irene Nan Goodman. Additionally, Casey and Sandy were unable to provide any contact information for Erica's grandmother, including the Facebook profile they said she used to communicate with them. The lead investigator put in a lot of effort to find Erica's grandmother and searched for people with her name in Asheville, but he found no evidence of anyone related to Erica. By August 2013, detectives publicly stated their belief that the story about Erica's grandmother was false. They also noted that Sandy and Casey were not cooperating with the investigation. Around the same time, Erica's biological mother, Carolyn Parsons, traveled to North Carolina to help the investigators. On August 21st, Casey and Sandy appeared on the Dr. Phil show, where they argued that Erica was not actually missing, but was a rebellious teenager who simply chose not to communicate with them. During the show, Casey mentioned that Erica's grandmother had told her that Erica refused to come home after staying with her for 2 months. Casey told Dr. Phil that Erica did not bring any of her personal belongings because when she went to stay with the Goodmans, they bought all new clothes for her to wear. When the Goodmans picked her up, a woman nicknamed Strawberry was also there and showed them a pile of clothes with tags in the back of their truck. The house where she was allegedly staying had a horse stable. The Parsons claimed that they also brought their other daughter, Brooke, along to bring Erica to Asheville. Brooke disputed this claim in her own interviews with the police, saying that she never rode a horse to Asheville to bring Erica to live there. Casey also claimed she attempted to contact Erica's grandmother, but the phone number was no longer in service, which she interpreted as Erica blocking their number. Although they appeared on national television, Casey and Sandy claimed they were good parents and insisted that Erica was safe. However, investigators were skeptical due to noticeable inconsistencies in their story. In September 2013, Casey opened her home to the media, showing Erica's old bedroom. But by then, public and official concern about Casey and Sandy's account was growing. The search for Erica continued as worries mounted about her well-being since her last confirmed sighting in 2011. Detectives on Erica Parsons' case had long suspected that Casey and Sandy were withholding important information. They believed that separating the couple might reveal the truth, as Casey seemed to dominate Sandy. However, It proved difficult to keep them apart until investigators discovered a significant error. The Parsons were still collecting adoption assistance and food stamps for Erica, even though she had not lived with them for 2 years. They received monthly checks of $634 in adoption assistance and continued to cash those checks after Erica was no longer living with them. They also continued to claim Erica on their tax returns. These federal benefits, meant for Erica's care, became crucial in involving the FBI. Casey pleaded guilty to 15 charges, while Sandy opted for trial. A jury found Sandy guilty on most charges in October 2014. The jury did not accept Sandy's claim that Casey had been in charge of the fraudulent activities and that he was unaware of their financial situation. At a sentencing hearing in federal court on February 18, 2015, Jamie Parsons and Robin Ashley testified about Erica's abuse by the Parsons family. Federal prosecutor Anand Ramaswamy stated that there was no record of Erica during the time her adoptive parents were receiving illegal money. Declare. The reason is that she is no longer alive. The hearing was continued until March 27. Prosecutors also presented evidence of a series of scams allegedly perpetuated by Casey Parsons. In 2000, Casey was hired to be a surrogate mother. She became pregnant and took a payment of $10,000 for her services. Weeks later, she called the biological mother, Amy Miller, to say that she had miscarried. Miller says she believed Casey was still pregnant, as Casey refused to turn over medical records, changed her phone number, and sent her nasty emails. Casey then offered to sell the baby to her own sister, Robin, who in turn searched for Miller online to tell her Casey was indeed still pregnant and that Casey had taken money from 2 other couples who wanted to adopt the baby. Miller was able to take custody of her child at birth after getting law enforcement involved. Evidence was also presented of an eBay scam, where Casey accepted money for items listed on eBay, but never sent the items. Judge Schroeder called Casey a serial swindler. On March 27, 2015, U.S. District Court Judge Thomas Schroeder sentenced Casey Parsons to 10 years in prison and Sandy to 8 years for fraud. Schroeder believes that Casey was the mastermind behind the events in question and stated that Erica suffered terrible abuse, noting that the fraud distracted investigators from other matters. The judge also mentioned that there was no evidence indicating that Erica was alive. In 2016, there was a significant breakthrough when Sandy, after more than 3 years of deception, confessed that Erica had died 5 years earlier at the age of 13. On September 29th, Sandy led investigators to Erica's remains. They were buried in a small grave near Sandy's mother's home on Blair Hendrick Road, between the towns of Pageland and Mount Croghan, South Carolina. Prior to the discovery, detectives recovered items during a search of a shed on Sandy's property, including a videotape, a hammer, teeth, and school records. There, Sandy quickly indicated the location of a shallow grave where he and Casey had buried Erica. Detectives noted that Sandy was somber and tearful during his confession. Sandy described the events leading up to Erica's death in December 2011. He was awakened by Casey, who informed him that Erica had died. Casey had placed Erica's body in a plastic tote, where it remained for 2 days while they figured out what to do. During this time, they continued with their lives and even attended a Christmas party. Eventually, they took Erica's remains to a site in Chesterfield County to bury her. To try to cover up any evidence, they poured bleach over her body. To avoid being tracked, they removed the batteries from their phones during their trips to the burial site, once to dig the grave and a second time to dispose of Erica's remains. After nearly 5 years of being hidden, Erica's body was finally found. Investigator Chad Moose led the effort to recover her remains, ensuring that she was treated with respect after her tragic life. To honor her, her remains were placed in a body bag that was left unzipped, allowing her to be at peace and no longer in darkness. Moose also added a stuffed animal to the bag while transporting her back to Rowan County. Finding Erica provided closure to a case that had troubled the community. and she was finally buried with the love and dignity she deserved. As one investigator noted, Erica received more love from the community than from her adoptive family. Investigators believed from the beginning that Casey Parsons was primarily responsible for what happened to Erica. They did not reveal the finding of Erica's remains in 2016, hoping that Casey would eventually confess. When faced with questions, Casey firmly denied any participation. She repeatedly claimed, "I've never been there," rejecting all allegations of abuse or misconduct. However, the evidence in the form of Erica's remains revealed a chilling account of ongoing and severe abuse. On October 14, 2016, Erica's remains were sent to the medical examiner, who took 3 months to carefully examine her skeleton. The results were heartbreaking. Erica had suffered severe and ongoing abuse, with injuries all over her body affecting her face, torso, back, and limbs. She had multiple fractures, including broken bones in her shoulder blades and ribs that had partially healed before being broken again. Some of the injuries showed signs of long-term trauma, with new bone growth trying to heal the damage. It was evident that Erica had faced continuous physical violence. Her brother, Jamie Parsons, confirmed the extent of the abuse in interviews. He described how Erica was regularly beaten, often with belts or remote controls, and mentioned friendly reminders, a cruel term used by Casey for bending Erica's fingers back until they almost touched her wrist. Erica experienced more than just physical violence. She was also starved for long periods, severely affecting her growth. By the time she was 13, her bones resembled those of a typical 9-year-old. This combination of abuse and neglect was considered torture, marking an extreme level of cruelty rarely seen in cases of child abuse. Family photos highlighted Erica's suffering as well. While her siblings looked happy and carefree in their pictures, Erica was often shown standing alone, facing a corner. These images powerfully illustrated her isolation and the neglect she faced, making the contrast between her siblings' joy and her own mistreatment deeply tragic. On June 18, 2017, Erica was finally laid to rest in a funeral organized and funded by the Rowan County community. Hundreds of people attended, wanting to show Erica the love and respect she never received during her life. On February 19, 2018, a grand jury indicted both Sandy and Casey Parsons on counts of first-degree murder, felony child abuse, inflicting serious injury, felony concealment of death, and felony obstruction of justice. Casey Parsons was brought to Rowan County for a court appearance on March 14, 2018, while Sandy Parsons was brought back for a court hearing on March 15. Prosecutors announced in April 2018 that they were seeking the death penalty for both Casey and Sandy Parsons. As of February 2019, defense attorneys agreed to separate trials. Casey Parsons pleaded guilty to first-degree murder on August 2, 2019 in Rowan County Superior Court and was sentenced to life without parole. The trial date for Sandy Parsons was set for April 6, 2020, and his attorney requested a change of venue. Sandy Parsons pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, child abuse, concealment of death, and obstruction on December 17, 2019, and was sentenced to at least 33 years to be served after his federal sentence. On January 14, 2022, according to the Federal Bureau of Prisons website, Sandy Parsons was released from federal custody after completing his sentence for tax and mail fraud in connection with benefits received on behalf of Erica. That same day, he began serving a state sentence in Central Prison. Federal Bureau of Prisons records show Casey Parsons was released from federal custody November 25, 2023, to begin serving her state sentence. At that time, her husband was listed as a prisoner at Alexander Correctional Institution. The motivations of the Parsons are still not fully understood, but their actions indicate a profound level of cruelty and neglect. Erica was treated inhumanely, enduring unimaginable suffering from those
who were supposed to care for her. As her community honors her memory and strives for justice, there is hope that policies and systems will be improved to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Erica, now at peace, will always be remembered.